Okay, I think this will get going. So I'll call the regular meeting of Township Council for Monday, May 8th to order. Just of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, acknowledge our special, unique relationships with the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Matsqui First Nations. So with that, I get a motion to adopt and receive the agenda items, please. Moved by Councillor Van Poptis, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question on A1. That carries unanimously. Moving on here to B1, adoption of minutes from the regular meeting of May 1st. Motion, please. Moved by Councillor Martin, second by Councillor Bailey. Any discussion on the minutes of that? Seeing none, call the question on B1. That carries. Councillor Richter absent. I won't say that for the remainder. B2, minutes from public hearing on May 1st. Motion, please. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Seeing no discussion on B2. That carries unanimously. So moving on to delegations. Benazar Usman, make sure I get that correct.
We've been advised Mr. Usman couldn't make it this afternoon. He's going to reschedule for July.
Great. Sounds good. Presentations, D1. Booth, Fernridge, and Rynn neighborhood plans from staff.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll let Mr. Chan, Mr. Chu, and Mr. Nelson get ready for their presentation. It's a team effort, so we're all waiting to see the results.
Turn your mic on. There we go.
Is the mic on here? All right, perfect. It's Chan Cooner, Director of Community Planning and Policy. Along with me today, I have Jason Chu, Manager of Community Planning and Policy, and Senior Planner Russell Nelson. Let me just give you a moment here to get the PowerPoint up.
Just for council's information, why don't we get the entirety of the presentation and then we'll add all questions to the end, if that works. Okay.
Your Worship, this presentation before you today is with respect to item F1 on the agenda, which is the proposed Brookswood-Fernridge neighborhood plans. The three proposed neighborhood plans are Booth, Fernridge, and Rynn. These will become the Township of Langley's blueprint for the future of these areas and the Brookswood-Fernridge community as a whole. These plans will guide the way the neighborhoods grow and evolve over the coming decades. The plans have been prepared based on project terms of reference, community input, feedback, established policies, and economic consideration, best practice and technical analysis. These proposed plans were developed through a multi-stage neighborhood planning process that sought input from a broad cross-section of public and key stakeholders. Feedback from the public was welcomed at any point in the planning process, including public engagement events and activities. And as anticipated, the perspective and opinions shared by the Brookswood-Fernridge community remain wide-ranging. However, the values of small town character and trees and nature preservation remain dominant key aspects of the Booth, Fernridge, and Rynn neighborhood plans. Now we will seek council to consider first and second reading to 4 bylaws, specifically Bylaw 5795, which is an OCP amendment for the Booth neighborhood plan, Bylaw 5796, which is an OCP amendment for the Fernridge neighborhood plan, Bylaw 5797, which is an OCP amendment for Rynn neighborhood plan, and finally, Bylaw 5798, which is an amendment to the Brookswood-Fernridge community plan. Now we'll have Mr. Chu and Mr. Nelson present the remainder of the presentation to provide further background information and more specifics with respect to the neighborhood plans.
Thank you, Mr. Cooner. Thank you, Your Worship. I will provide some background information on the 3 proposed neighborhood plan, and Mr. Nelson will go over some of the key features of the proposed NPs. In terms of background, the proposed neighborhood plans for Booth, Fernridge, and Rin fit into a broader policy framework. The proposed NPs are consistent with the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy that designates the Brookswood-Fernridge community as general urban. They are within the urban containment boundary of the RGS. So on the map here, hopefully you're seeing the same screen that we are seeing on the left-hand side. We're showing you an excerpt of the Regional Growth Strategy Land Use Plan. So the thick dotted line there is 196th Street, which is the boundary between the Township of Langley and the City of Surrey. And as you can see, the gray area is actually for general urban designation in the RGS. And then on the other side of 196th Street, and that is to the west or on the left side of 196th Street on the map here, the area is Campbell Heights, and it's designated industrial. So the reason that I brought up the designation in Campbell Heights is that if we were to look at this general area, Campbell Heights and Brookswood-Fernridge, it's pretty well a complete community. On one side is providing employment, and on this side we're providing general urban uses, including residential, commercial, and other institutional uses. The Township of Langley official community plan has some land use designations as well. So on the screen, you can see that the yellow area in Brookswood-Fernridge is consistent with the RGS, and it is designated urban. And it has been the case since 1979, when the first OCP for the township was adopted. Based on the 1979 first OCP, the Brookswood-Fernridge area was also designated for general urban and residential uses. So this is the first Brookswood-Fernridge community plan, and it was adopted by council in 1987. The plan envisioned the community as a suburban community of about 35,000 when it was completely built out. So as you can see, the kind of yellowish tone area, it's for single-family residential development. In 2017, the current Brookswood-Fernridge community plan was adopted by council. The focus of the new community plan was on the developed areas, so it's basically the richer color areas, and the area that is currently quarter-acre lots were considered as developed areas. So the focus of the plan was purely focusing on the portions that are not developed as single-family lots, quarter-acre in size. So just to point out the obvious, just like the 1987 plan, the new Brookswood-Fernridge community plan calls for mostly single-family development. And the projected population is about 39,000 based on the current Brookswood-Fernridge community plan. Now, this slide shows the vision for the new community plan, and we have highlighted some of the keywords in green. The vision statement serves as an image of what Brookswood-Fernridge will look like when the community is fully built out. So we have things like small town feel. People don't really see a large urban community with some very high density development. And towering trees were the two dominant community values for the community at the time we were looking at the new plan back in 2015, 2017 range, again with the adoption in 2017. Another highlight of the community plan was the creation of a neighborhood planning program. In 2019, Council directed staff to prepare 3 neighborhood plans for the area shown here. Again, Booth, Fernridge, and Wren. We do not have direction from Council to do a plan for the Glenwood area, and that's the area shown in white towards the bottom right corner of the map there. Now, with that background, I will now ask Mr. Russell Nelson to highlight the planning process for preparing the 3 NPs and also some of the key features of the neighborhood plans. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The following slides have a fair bit of information on them, all valuable information, but I'm not going to belabor and necessarily point out everything that's on the slide. Obviously, we as humans, we can read considerably faster than we can speak. So please let your eyes roll through the whole slide, and I'll just note on a couple of items per slide in order to be responsive to our time. So the plan preparation rolled over a 3-phase exercise. As noted in the largest of the gray squares on the slide there, went through a number of steps, and often you'd go through and then back up and do more technical work or more policy work, bring forward things to the community, to council, get some feedback, and go back and kind of go through that exercise over and over again. The intent is ultimately to have a really strong evidence-based policy development outcome, which we think we have. I want to kind of talk just recently, or the most recent work. Chan already touched on sort of the broader brushstrokes of that, but looking back to a little over a year ago, the draft neighborhood plans were released, and we went through a fairly extensive amount of public engagement and consultation that lasted roughly 3, if not 4 months. Ran several different events, and also presented at the conclusion of that last spring a result of all the public engagement that had been done on the process. So that council report included all the engagement summaries for the whole exercise, and based on the timing, council of the day said they would wait till after the municipal elections to actually consider the neighborhood plans. So most recently, in November of this year, new mayor and council, notice of motion was passed to complete the 3 neighborhood plans with some economic reconsideration. The underline is part of that notice of motion, but if you want to read the whole thing, I think it's on page 3 of the staff report in italics. You can get the full breadth of what was involved there. One of the key parts of that was the economic reconsideration. And again, here's a couple of summary statements about what conclusions emerged from that economic analysis that the consultant did on our behalf. Obviously, as we probably know from our experiences, we have some inflated land prices in the area. We have some high construction material costs, higher interest rates, among other things that are making development a bit more challenging these days than maybe it was 12 months ago. And the economic consideration, that analysis looked at different development scenarios and generally concluded that given our policy framework, or at least elements of it, particularly around density, that development for all the different forms is a bit challenging. Some more so than others, but all of them were challenged in order to proceed based on the proposal as presented. So we'll come back to that a little bit more here in a moment, kind of circle around and sort of be able to tie those comments off and what that meant in terms of updating the plan. So I want to touch on just 6 kind of items here. Again, some of the slides are a little heavier than others, but we'll go through each of these. So I want to talk a little bit about affordable housing, and this is where the economic reconsideration tied in. So based on the summation, the results of that analysis, The neighborhood plans were updated, particularly around increasing density. So the single-family lot sizes, the minimum were reduced for both the single-family 2 and the single-family 3, which for a variety of reasons actually gets called single-family 4 in the neighborhood plans. We can get into that later. Missing middle housing, also an important consideration to provide a variety of housing choice, but also address affordability. Increasing in a more modest way, but still increasing densities and some height around the row home, townhome, apartment, and commercial village land use designations. And then the other key result as well was the removal of the cluster conservation development model that's outlined in the community plan. Second item, just want to touch on a little bit, is about our parks, open space, our nature conservation and greenway network. I consider this fairly robust. That's 610 acres of space for all 3 neighborhood plans in total is being accommodated through, again, all those different variations, through parks, different types of open space, different types of nature conservation areas, and different types of greenways. And as noted at the last point there, these are the mainstay of the community in terms of providing the retention and regeneration and restoration of trees. It's not that the developed lots and so forth, that there's policies for those as well in terms of retaining and restoring, but these 4 items here really serve as the backbone that hold everything else up. We also have 3 different policies. One's noted here around collecting amenity funds to pay for, in this case, a new recreation center, a new fire hall, urban parks, among other things. And the community amenity contributions policy, which we currently have. Proposal here, you have a draft in your package showing a separate line item or separate area specific to this area in terms of securing, paying for those amenities, and then contributing to other ones such as the housing affordability, CAC, or CAS, the Climate Action Strategy, and so forth. Also, the neighborhood plans, unlike past greenfield development areas over the last 25 years, we're looking at a slightly different amended approach to delivery of our arterial roads in the neighborhood plans. And it's kind of a layering or a combination of things. One of them is establishing a specific BFAR cap, or BCAP, if you want to call it that, but a Brookswood Fern Ridge Arterial Road Completion Amenity Fund. So again, collecting funds through development, using those as a means to purchase land, and then using our DCC funds to help with the construction side of that. But to layer or improve the delivery of it, we also have policy in the neighborhood plan looking to prioritize development applications that front on arterial roads, using those as a key driver to get that important road infrastructure network in earlier rather than later. Change in density results in a change in the amount of school-age children that we anticipate in the area. So the school numbers noted here in terms of number of elementary schools and so forth are a bit higher than what the community plan shows and what the draft neighborhood plans of last year show. So we're looking at a few more elementary schools, an additional middle school. The new secondary school was already identified. And then lastly, looking at making sure that we've right-sized our commercial retail to serve the population. So compared to the 2022 draft plan, we've added a bit more commercial space, particularly specifically in the Fern Ridge area, again, to make sure that we're having the right amount of space so that people can shop, get their daily needs, get to the pharmacy, anything that they need on a daily and weekly basis is there in their community. So kind of lessen their amount of shopping trips that they have to do outside of the area.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson and Mr. Chu. Your worship, also included in the staff report are draft zoning schedules, draft Brookswood Fernridge Greenway amenity policy, and draft amendment to the community amenity contribution policy as well. These documents would facilitate implementation of these neighborhood plans before council today. We will also present a draft artillery road completion amenity policy, which Mr. Nelson has touched on, as he likes to say, BARF cap, no, or BRF cap. And these policies would be adopted by council at the time of final reading, given to the proposed neighborhood plans. It is now staff's recommendation that council consider first and second reading for the bylaws number 5795, 5796, 5797, and 5798. This concludes our presentation, subject to any questions from your worship.
Yeah, we have a couple questions. I'm going to start it off. Could you, just to make it completely clear, the endorsement for first and second reading is contingent upon what degree of public engagement that might be a little atypical?
So once first and second reading is granted, there will be a public information that is scheduled for May 25th, and then an opportunity for public to provide their input on May 29th, which is scheduled, I believe, through CPP and Ledge Services.
So my understanding, though, is one of the things I was relieved to see that it's a little bit atypical. Typically, you'd have the open house before first and second reading, and now we're putting that between first and second to send to the public something that has been to council table, and then the public hearing shortly thereafter. So you're anticipating up to 3 weeks or 4 weeks for the public and property owners to provide their input? Is that what you're correct?
That is correct, Your Worship. It allows for council as well to consider this for over a month, and the public to provide their feedback and additional comments, which may at that time, at third, provide an opportunity for council to either seek directions or request further amendments.
And so for scheduled third reading, potentially mid-June, that would leave up to almost 5 weeks for council to read these documents and talk to staff and talk to members of the public leading up to the 29th. That'd be a fair amount of additional consultation in addition to just a public hearing. So I'm going to move on to some of the members of council. Councilor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff for this presentation. Definitely some areas that I'm really happy to see improvement made on the previous renditions of these plans. And so just a few questions in regards to specifically the prioritization and you might call it phasing of some of the pieces of the neighborhood plans. And if you could walk through just specifically, again, what the difference would be between the Brookswood and Fernridge arterial road policy and then the Willoughby road policy, and how we might ensure that there's actually, we saw in Willoughby a little bit of a lack of uptake within that program, how we're going to deal with that in Brookswood, and then just go into a little bit greater detail how we are going to indeed phase things in Brookswood so we see a bit more of a compact growth as we go forward with these plans.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Pratt, with respect to the artillery road policy, that is in its initial stages. We included a section in the corporate report that addresses it. We will be drafting and finalizing it, so some of the concerns may be addressed at that point. I believe it's a little too early to comment on the difference between the Willoughby artillery road program and the Brookswood, just as we are in its initial stages at this time. And with respect to your second question, I'd actually defer to Mr. Nelson on the phasing aspect, as he was intimately involved in that part as well.
Yeah, we when we started the process of preparing these plans, we went to great lengths to try to find what others, if anyone, was doing anything in regards to sort of phasing and sort of guiding the delivery of infrastructure. And other than the plans themselves, there were very few examples of a good policy out there, actually absent of any policy. So we had to roll up our sleeves and be very thoughtful and creative and try to find a pathway that's unique and specific to this area. it's sort of a multiplicity or a layering of things. The ones we did mention, the B cap, that will get presented in a draft form a little bit later. But in the plan itself, on a plan policy basis, there's the requirement for development to have arterial road frontage in order to proceed. And that way, again, we're securing development of that infrastructure early on. So if you have land that's not on arterial, then you need to work with others or consolidate some additional land in order to get that arterial road frontage in order to proceed. So again, we're privileging developments that are giving us arterial road frontage. A second item in the plans is particularly in the Booth and the Fern Ridge, and this is predicated on a policy in the community plan in terms of trying to look to, again, prioritizing plans not only that have arterial road frontage, but also that are within some measure of proximity, suggested 800 meters from the current sort of boundary between what we most consider the existing Brookswood area and the new areas that are made up by these neighborhood plans. So again, between the arterial road requirement and then privileging applications in those areas in close proximity, the intent would be to essentially see a north to south phasing of infrastructure and development over time.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you very much. And if I may, Your Worship, just
Go
one more
ahead,
question. Yeah, I noticed that reading the report, one of the differences between previous renditions of the NPs and these ones are we no longer have a direct kind of percentage or proportion of conservation area within individual lots. And part of the rationale, as I understand it, to go to smaller lots as opposed to larger ones would be to assist with some of that conservation. I was wondering if you could just walk us through exactly how that will work and what the rationale behind smaller lots helping conservation is.
Just gonna. Just bear with me. I'm just gonna pull up the exact slide if I could. Through your worship to Councillor Pratt, yes, there's no percentage available. The strategy here is creating more of a green infrastructure network. Yes, we are densifying it, but there's a significant priority with respect to just preserving some of the nature areas. Where in the previous rendition, there was an opportunity, let's say, for example, 26% land dedication, that there can be interpreted to clear cut it and just dedicate the land. Now the emphasis is actually preserving and keeping the form and character of Brookswood rather than allowing the developer to proceed and say, I've dedicated 26% of the land and potentially not align with the form and character of the Brookswood community plan. So that was the intent and the rationale for proceeding with the avenue that we have.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there too. Sorry, Councillor Pratt, I'm just going to reiterate that because I think it's a critical point. So that's something that I didn't quite understand until November when Council was contemplating that notice of motion, that if we're dedicating, in the previous draft of the plan, there were requests to dedicate 26% of a development application for conservation works, that area could be clear cut, relocated to a different location on the lot, and then restored. And so while land was being dedicated, so I want to make sure I've summarized this correctly. I'm looking to Mr. Nelson to confirm, but summarizing that flexibility was contained within the previous version of the draft neighborhood plans from last year. That again, an individual, the proponent, could propose an application, propose to dedicate 26% of their specific application, clear cut it, and relocate it. So essentially you could clear cut the whole lot, say 26% is being preserved and then replanted. That to me missed the intent of trying to preserve that character, and what Mr. Chu outlined was a key defining objective. How do we say it's conservation if we're allowing it to be clear cut? I just want to make sure that I have that correct, however. Then I'll go back
That
to
understanding was
Councillor Pratt.
correct, Your Worship. Let me just look back and get the head nod.
And so
Yes, it
while
was
I
correct.
think it had the right motivation, maybe there was some expectation that people wouldn't do that. But technically, that is a process that would be permitted by development services, that we would end up with some urban land reserve, but that essentially it could be clear cut. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
So then, if I'm understanding correctly now, the proponents aren't necessarily sure of what portion or what parts of their site would be deemed conservation area, or are they clearly instructed at a time when they're coming forward with an application that this is what we need, but we're willing to be flexible on, say, lot size in order to make the pro forma work so that a project can move forward, we can deliver housing, but we're still protecting the parts of Brookswood that we want to protect?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Pratt, I just want to clarify the present plan, not the previous plan, correct? So here, if you go to one of the map sections, I don't have it before me in the environment, there's an layout of the areas we're attempting to protect with a floating tree emblem, which does give us clear direction on these are the general areas where we would like to see the preservation, and gives development services when these plans are adopted and an application is brought forward, an opportunity to see that this is the areas, I'd like to say without specifying an exact specific land, we are going to be preserving.
Okay, great.
So the previous rendition of this plan did not have that component to it.
Right, thank you.
I think that's an important distinction, Councillor Pratt, that while that sounded great, and I applaud the effort to set aside urban land for conservation, I think it was sending the message of conservation, when in fact it was setting aside land, not necessarily preserving the elements that people care about and were communicating last council term. I'm going to touch on phasing. Councillor Pratt brought that up. That debate feels like that passed us by. That was something that I attempted to do very early on in the last term, was to not see 3 neighborhood plans run concurrent. I just wonder if you could maybe get some of that history for the new council, which feels a bit atypical to see 3 neighborhood plans coming forward simultaneously, where that didn't occur in Willoughby. And that would have provided for some element of phasing, but if you could please highlight that previous councils gave you direction, and here we are today.
I was not here during previous council, your worship, so I'd actually just defer to
Good.
Mr. Nelson on that
I think
one.
it'd be very important for this council to hear that we're dealing with the decision of the prior council, which some of us tried to stop. Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
So when the proposed community plan for Brookswood Fernridge came forward, I guess to step back a little bit, its context, it's been a bit of a bumpy ride, to put it in kind terms. A lot of contention, a lot of varied opinions and perspectives on what should or shouldn't be happening in the Brookswood Fernridge area. Staff were tasked with putting together a new community plan following the terms of reference that they adopted. We did that. Even in the end, the adoption council process was equally bumpy, and that there were a number of amendments that were made. We ended up with 2 different public hearings, and I think it spanned several months before we got to conclusion. So I think the neighborhood plans similarly have been not as challenging, but still challenging. But in terms of their rationale, to just speak honestly, I'm not wholly sure. We gathered when council gathered for their final readings on it, and it came as much as a surprise to staff that we were being tasked with doing 3 neighborhood plans, and we would look at the details of that at a later date. So in all honesty, I don't have the background. It was gathering a political decision, and we're proceeding based on that.
And here we are. Okay, so thanks. I had one more follow-up on Councillor Pratt's question in regards to phasing and some of that. Has there been any contemplation of a minimum assembly size that would assist with what Councillor Pratt was touching on in regards to seeing some additional preservation of existing trees? And would that help? Is there any contemplation of a minimum assembly size?
There's nothing in the plans currently about minimum assembly size, but the policy regarding the requirement for minimum amount of linear frontage related to arterial. So it's not just any arterial frontage, it has to be 100 meters in total. Now that could span over 2 arterials if you have to be on a quarter lot, or if your assembly is such that you're somehow doing some arterial upgrades here and some here. It just sets the minimum. So we don't have a land area, but more of emphasis, again, privileging the road infrastructure as the key driver.
And so if, the reason I was touching on that, do we see some complications in Willoughby based upon no contemplation of minimum assembly? So that if someone approaches development services with a 2-acre site and say it's got a lot of trees on it that we'd like to see preserved, but if it had been combined within a 40-acre development or 50-acre development, maybe wouldn't be consequential? Are we going to see some instances where some property owners may advocate saying, well, I've only got 2 acres, so let me clear cut it, versus if they were combined within a 40-acre assembly, those trees could potentially be saved and built around? Do you have any thoughts on how it may help for this council to consider a minimum assembly in that context? First of all, do I have that example potentially correct? Do you have any thoughts on how to see some of these mature trees preserved, which we're not seeing in Willoughby as much?
Yeah, I think from sort of setting, I'll break it up into a couple of different responses. So setting a minimum lot size threshold or development site can be a little challenging to kind of figure out what the right kind of landing spot is, that it's not asking too much, but it's asking enough. I think in part it would be driven by sort of the form of development. I think single family, you'd tend to want larger holdings, and in the more multifamily, you could get likely a bit smaller just because of the form of development and how the site planning proceeds in that regard. We don't, as I said, we don't have anything at the moment, but if council wishes, it's something we could look at in more detail in the coming weeks and bring something back in terms of a couple of different ideas. My sense would be, however, that if we're setting a 100-meter minimum frontage for arterial, we are pushing the issue through that, requiring assemblies, just looking at the current landholding patterns that exist in each of the neighborhoods. By doing that, we are pushing a consolidation requirement. There's very few parcels in the 3 neighborhood plans that start out with a fair bit of land, like really few. It's quite parcelized, so that requirement will make that consolidation without necessarily having to set a minimum in the language of the plan.
Great, I think that's helpful. Councillor Pratt, do you have any follow-ups on that at all? Okay, Karen. Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really happy to hear about barf cap, because that was one of my questions. War cap was something I supported last term, so I'm happy to support that. But one of my questions actually is about the arterial roads and the truck route, 32nd Avenue, 16th Avenue. We know that Roberts Bank 2 is coming online, and that could be operational in about 6 or 7 years. Is there any federal government responsibility as to what those traffic impacts are going to have on our neighborhoods and the roads that those are main corridors, and it's a huge economic driver for our country. Yet I think, in Brookswood, we're going to really feel that on 16th and possibly 24th if it gets opened, and 32nd Avenue.
Through your worship to Councillor Kuntz, we are waiting on an updated transportation study that may address some of the concerns there, and we can get back to you on that question, whether we need to contact the different levels of government, whether it being the province, have them assist, or do a concurrent study, transportation study, with the 16th Avenue, 24th, or 32nd, as those are major arterial roads that are truck routes, I believe. And that may be an option for us as well.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So I had another question about the CAC formula. So when I was looking at the formula and how that was going to be distributed, how does that work for Brookswood? Because it's kind of, and maybe I didn't read it right, but it seemed like 75% of the CACs could possibly go out of Brookswood. No, that's not right. So how do we make sure that the CACs that are paid for Brookswood stay in Brookswood? Not that, we don't have to share, and I get that, we all use the amenities all around Langley, but I noticed a satellite recreation center. Does that mean like it's kind of half a recreation center, or does Brookswood get like a full rec center, community center?
Through your worship to Councillor Kuntz, I believe the CAC policy was intended to be specific to Brookswood, and there is a generic headings associated with it, whether it be a community center, let's say there's 125 million. The intent would be to then contribute that amount towards a community center within Brookswood. I think maybe the word satellite community center, not completely familiar with it as well. I may have to defer to Mr. Nelson on that for that language, but the intent is to make sure the amenities are provided to the residents of Brookswood.
Could you go back to the slide that showed that? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, it actually was in the, when you read the neighborhood plan, so it wasn't on your slide, but it's actually in the neighborhood plan. Yeah.
I think there was it touched on it. There we are. Potentially some one of these slides. That one there. There we are.
Yeah. So that's the headings that we have under the CAC regime there. It's a recreation center, a fire hall, urban parks. There is some flexibility within that as well.
Okay. I have a few more questions.
I'm just going to follow up on CACs then before we move on. Yeah. So the CAC program, this is the intention, and I haven't gone over the amendments. I was looking at the basket as opposed to the structure. But Council, based on Councillor Kuntz's comments and others, potentially could have a separate CAC category specific to these amenities intended for the Brookswood Fernridge area, with a certain percentage of CACs from Brookswood Fernridge going into that bucket, so to speak. And so we could restructure it that way, Councillor Kuntz, if you're interested in doing that. I'm also contemplating that the CAC contemplates a recreation center at full build out of currently projected 60,000 people. So this is, to me, be a long-term project required by, when the population hits a certain level, potentially looking at some expansion of recreation center facilities, potentially relocation of those facilities, to be determined probably by future councils. So I'm assuming when we say satellite, that could either be in conjunction to George Preston or a replacement, depending on the decisions of the future. Would that be fair?
Yes, Your Worship. There's some flexibility within that.
And that could be modified and changed and expanded by council as the process unfolds.
That is correct. As you refer to, the baskets can always change. Labeling them can always be changed as well.
Yeah, so
it's just to provide some guidance and assistance at this time.
yeah, I appreciate that. Councillor Kuntz, go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, I have some more questions. So much of RIN runs along 208 Street, and on the other side is original Brookswood, as I like to call it. So will the services that may run up 208 Street, and then there's all the homes on the other side that are essentially almost all of them are on septic. Will there be an opportunity for those residents to tie in? And will all of original Brookswood want to have, sewer at some point? And do we have the capacity to sort of, because that's a sort of another whole area that I think we need to contemplate is, what's the original Brookswood is probably 40, 50 years old. So.
Through your worship to Councillor Kuntz, we are waiting on an updated engineering servicing plan that may address some of those questions as well. And I may even refer to Mr. Swag on this and just kind of throw him under the bus here. But
Thank you, through your worship. Based upon reviewing the updated neighborhood plans, it's generally in compliance with the Metro Vancouver regional infrastructure needs. So servicing would be provided accordingly. If upgrades are required, we would follow the Metro Vancouver process for those upgrades.
Okay. One last question. So with the neighborhood plans, if they're adopted, does that increase the value of these properties? And with that increase, will those be assessed at a higher rate? And now people will have to pay higher taxes? It's just one of those questions that I think we may have to, we may be asked.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Kuntz, it's a little bit difficult to provide a definitive answer to that. Some property values may increase, some may not, some may decrease, and that's up to the BC Assessment, the Taxation Authority, to provide a valuation subsequent to the final adoption of these neighborhood plans. So it's difficult for us at this time to say whether the value will be increasing. Is there going to be a higher tax revenue? At this time, we cannot make a calculation or anticipate that.
Okay, and one final question. Because I sit on the Heritage Advisory Committee, I noticed that the Fernridge Community Hall was, highlighted as a heritage building. Are there any other heritage buildings in the Brookswood Fernridge Probably in Glenwood, but yeah, okay. But nothing that we've highlighted.
Through your worship to Councillor Kuntz, yes, if it's labeled on the map, that means we've highlighted as heritage. If it's not, I don't believe there's any further one, unless there's anything in Glenwood. I believe there is one in Glenwood off the top of my head, but we haven't considered that neighborhood plan, so I don't believe it's been highlighted or identified.
Okay, thank you for answering all my questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martins.
Yep, thank you very much for the presentation. Question, and then I'll explain the reason for my question. What is the process to add items to the amenities list for the CACs? My specific question is with regard to a community police office. There hasn't been one in that area for a number of years. Whether that takes on a storefront, part of a community center, or a standalone building, just in general, how do we get that one on the table, included in the discussion?
Through your worship to Councillor Martin. So as you can see, it's a draft CAC policy we have before us, and I keep using this word as well, is there, within the CAC policies, there's buckets that are preliminary identified to where the funds will flow to. For example, the community center. There may be some flexibility within the community center that there's a CPO office or a community policing component to that may be addressed at that later stage or even during a capital project that allows that flexibility. So there is a significant amount of flexibility to incorporate that and deliver the need for Brookswood. As I understand, there is no community police office at this moment. So that can be easily worked in within the buckets.
Thank you. Yes, because it's important, especially if we're looking at increased density. We need to increase police presence, and that's the easiest way to do it proactively, and also improve response times to calls for that neighborhood. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mr. Cooner, I think the process for any member of council would be if they wish to contemplate something like that, they could probably work with staff on a potential amendment to cost out an item, cost out the burden, percentage breakdown between new and existing residents, and probably come forward with an amendment that would change the rates potentially. That could happen during public hearing, third, and to final adoption. That would be possible. Yeah,
that is correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, great. So that'd be the process, I think, for any member of council who wish to look at some modifications to CAC to work with staff on what that might look like and how that formula would change all the numbers. Councillor Van Popta? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Through your worship to Mr. Cooner. Mayor Woodward asked a couple of the questions. I just want to delve into them a little bit further. Just can you walk me through the process if if we're not doing minimum land parcels and things like that, if we've got a small single lot or maybe two single lots and it happens to be in the conservation areas that we've identified, how is that owner to be able to build on their lot while having conservation? So are we doing land swaps or how does that work?
Mr. Cooner, it might be helpful to explain the GAP program a tad and how that might work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Through your worship to Councillor Van Popta, there is a Greenway amenity policy. I believe off the top of my head, do not quote me on this, it's approximately $375,000 per acre. So those funds will be allocated to the Greenway amenity policy, the GAP we refer to. So if the site is going to be an urban park, one of the floating trees, whether we're going to preserve it, there will be a mechanism available to when the landowner, that we are able to purchase that land through the funds in the GAP. So whatever amount, if there's, hypothetically speaking, $20 million in the GAP fund, and we're able to purchase the site, and when the developer comes forward for $5 million, then we would pay through it. We'll pay for it through the GAP fund and acquire it, and then preserve that nature area.
And that could even be a subset of the proposed development as opposed to the site. It could be, say, 20% or 30% of your site is very mature trees that are combining with other lots that have not come forward yet. That could be acquired through the GAP program, and it could be funded from previous development. That would be a
Okay, so we're not-
process, so that we're not running, I think that's how the Greenway amenity policies in Willoughby currently work, the same principle, that over time these are constructed as development comes forward and gaps are filled through acquisition, using funded from growth, not from taxpayers. That makes sense?
As long as the landowner has the ability to either A, sell his lot for that purpose, or B, have it swapped so that they can, that they're not losing out.
There is flexibility within that GAP program to have those sites acquired by the township.
Okay, thank you. And one other one, just back to Mr. Nelson's comment in regards to, we're operating on previous directions from previous councils in terms of not being able to phase these plans. I mean, we've been able to walk back other decisions from previous councils. Is this not something that's feasible for us to just start with one plan and move to the next plan?
Well, Mr.
rather than
Cooner, I
working
actually
it
have
out?
some notes for when the item comes forward and options for council, how to proceed. And of course, one of them would be to adopt some subset or one or two or 1, 2, 3, or 0 of the neighborhood plans. That would be one option.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make Mr. Cooner
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
add
sure,
to that?
Worship, through you to Councillor Van Popta. We'd be looking towards council for first and second reading if there is an avenue available, if the intent or the prerogative is to only proceed with one of the neighborhood plans. We are at the mercy of the elected officials to give us direction on which way to proceed. And also with respect to the phasing, I'd like to just provide a second comment on that is, just like every other neighborhood plan, there is prerequisites set with respect to school sites and detention ponds. As everyone can anticipate, due to the increase in density, the amount has increased. So that may assist, saying may, in the phasing of the development within this neighborhood plan.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The infrastructure costs are so significant that there may be portions of these plans that don't proceed for some time.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, to staff through the chair, looking at this book that you guys have prepared.
Do you want to hold it up? Want to hold it up?
It's at least half of that, okay? And being new to this process, I got to admit, I tried to skim it instead of reading word for word like I normally do, and so I have to ask a question, and that is all the areas, all three of the neighborhood areas, are they serviced with water?
Through your worship to Councillor Bailey, is your question related with respect to the topography or the geotechnical analysis, if we've done that?
Talking about pipe water.
Oh,
Water in the pipe.
just water
I don't know what the
water
proper
mains,
word
water
is.
mains?
Water mains.
Okay, I defer to engineering on that one.
Thank you. Through your worship, I'm not privy to all the details of neighborhood plans. I assume it will be based on service levels. So if it's service level 1 or 2, requirement would be service by water. But again, that's just from previous knowledge, not intimate knowledge of this neighborhood plan.
Yeah, I don't worry about the outflow. I'm worried about the inflow. The reason I asked that is for fire protection. Now, I'm really glad to see that we're going to be putting a new fire hall in there. We're going to be staffing it, which the residents should really love, not only in the response times going down from 13 to 15 minutes to possibly closer to proper parameters like 4 to 6 minutes, but they should also really like the fact that their insurance rates are probably going to go down if they have water coming out of the pipe and they have a staffed fire hall there that is also in the proper location. So I just, I want to have a shout out to the city of Surrey too. They should be thanking us and maybe donate a little bit of money to this, because when we put the fire hall in there and we staff it, we're going to respond if asked to their industrial area a lot faster than Hall 14 will. And if they have a major incident, I can guarantee you that Surrey will be on the horn real fast. And we very possibly will have the fastest and most effective service. So I'd like to, just to shout out the Surrey Council. Maybe they'd like to donate a little bit of money to us. And that's not, while it sounds a little lighthearted, let me talk to you about why I mentioned the industrial area in Surrey is hazardous materials. Okay, and this is a site that we may want in the future to look a hazmat team, because timely response in regards to a dangerous goods spill is critical. And our hall will be very well positioned to help out in the needs of mutual or automatic aid. So putting a fire hall in there and having it staffed is a huge benefit to this program. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Before I say anything, I want to just pass on to my colleague, Councillor Bailey, the Mayor of Surrey, Brenda Locke's phone number. Anyway, well, yes, I mind there's been a lot of questions asked, and there will be a lot more. I hope we haven't even got to the bylaws yet, so they're coming up under F1 and bylaws for first and second. What I wanted to ask, just housekeeping, if I may, through the chair, Mr. Cooner, you got me at the mercy of council part. I know this is perhaps your first presentation to council. I wanted to say the housekeeping questions. Your May 25th meeting or information session, where are you holding that? And the next, I'm going to have a series of sub-questions all related to housekeeping. Public input, will there be those fluorescent cards going in the mail like that we used to get? And any other things sent out in mail, and also the advertising in newspapers and public, I guess either social media and otherwise. And also for the May 29th meeting as well. That's all it in one question.
Through your worship to Councillor Ferguson, I believe that department is with Ledge Services, so I'll actually refer to Ms. Bauer.
Yeah, actually, I'll answer that. Do we have the date and time, location for the open house?
I believe we're determining that as well, and I'll actually just refer to Ms. Bauer. If we've determined the location, I think we have the location.
I think it's in the staff report, but just go ahead.
Yeah, it's in the staff report. Yeah, it's on Thursday, May 25th. It'll be held at the Brookswood Baptist Church on 36th Avenue. Plenty of parking, ease of access. And yes, a full range of communication tools will be used and applied to make sure that everyone is aware of the time and the date, and any and all things given its positioning in between first and second reading and the public hearing. Anything that's given to us, which we encourage in terms of written correspondence, either filling something out then or giving it to us within the couple of days following, will be forwarded to council and form part of the public record as part of the public hearing.
Oh, how about your fluorescent cards?
Yeah, so Ms. Bauer, I believe mail-out requirements will be met, advertising requirements will be met. So those will be sent out, Councillor Ferguson.
Do you know how many cards are going out, if I may, through the chair?
What's the requirement?
See,
Ms.
there
Bauer?
is a requirement.
Yeah, what is the minimum requirement?
We expect the public hearing notice will be about 10,000.
Thank you very much.
It's quite extensive.
Yeah, that's why it's important.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, I forgot to ask, we recently all heard about the announcement from the provincial government about adding more housing in our municipalities. Does this announcement have any impact on the neighborhood plans?
Through your worship to Councillor Kuntz, that announcement, we actually haven't seen any further details or what the provincial government's mandate is, so we haven't considered it until there's more specifics. It's a very generic announcement at this time. I believe they're saying 3 dwellings or 4 dwellings per unit, but we haven't explored that further yet until more specifics will be rolled out through the provincial government at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I believe there's no way to know if that's going to be based on a minimum lot size, based upon a growing area versus an established area, whether or not it's going to apply to municipalities who are meeting housing targets versus those that are not. I mean, there's plenty of criteria and information that's not available. It's a nice, pretty PDF, but that's about all it is at this point. Yeah. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And it was something you mentioned and jogged my mind to this. And we talk about every time we go through a neighborhood or community planning process, trying to learn from the previous ones. And I'm just curious, reading through the institutional part of the proposed plans, we're once again kind of depending on, wait and see when we're talking about school acquisition sites. And obviously with such an anticipated rate of growth in Brookswood, just a concern or a question around, are we going to be a little bit more proactive in trying to actually secure school sites in Brookswood, Fernridge, compared to how we have done it in the past, so that we're actually able to build schools as we need them.
Can you go back to that slide, Mr. Cooner, maybe address that question? There we are. Yeah.
Yes, through your worship to Councillor Pratt, we will be setting prerequisites for certain areas to open up to secure neighborhood sites. And we have been working in consultation with the school district and school district staff. And with those consultations, what happens is there's a lot of communications regarding exact locations, ingress and egress, and even site visits to say these are appropriate ones that the school district would like to consider. So those high-level discussions will continue to take place and will be prerequisites prior to any neighborhoods opening up, essentially.
So we're going to try and actually acquire these sites before any development occurs?
There's flexibility on that, whether we keep the prerequisite in the developer or we go out and acquire them ourselves and sell it to the provincial government. So, or make an acquisition there. So there's, I believe, flexibility in that.
So I have a question about the source of these numbers. I think it's an excellent point Councillor Pratt raised. So I'm, going to ask a interesting question. So right now, current population of the Willoughby area is approximately 50,000, 55,000, Mr. Chu, somewhere in there. And it has one secondary school. It has 3 middle schools. So for some, in some reason for a projected 60,000 population, we're saying it needs 2 secondary schools, 4 middle schools. I think there's one, I don't know how many there are now. I think none right now, can't remember. And it would need some quantity of elementary schools greater than Willoughby's projected build out of 100 and something thousand. So maybe it could be clarified why we're seeing these numbers seem to be not aligning with what's actually occurring in Willoughby.
Your Worship, it's with respect to the guidelines provided by the school districts and catchment areas. And there's also another component of enhancing the current schools that are presently there as well. So that's another component of it, is that there's a few school sites that's already existing, and we can enhance those as well that will address some of the catchment issues.
Yeah, so I think we all know that Willoughby needs more school sites and needs more school capacity, but for 60,000 people, we seem to be equating with what's currently on the books for 100,000. So I think that's something I might explore with staff to understand where those requirements are coming from and why they don't seem to align with what we're seeing elsewhere. This is a very significant amount of land, which is fine to set that aside, but do we essentially set land aside that maybe isn't acquired by the school district for many decades?
We work with the school district and try to meet the guidelines provided by them. Those could be some discussions to be had with school district staff or trustees with respect to the guidelines and any flexibility there, or enhancing the guidelines or adopting a different school model, whether it be how the Vancouver school model is based. So there may be some avenues available.
And then the expectation of each one of these sites being of significant size. Has there been any thinking around that potentially being revisited?
There's a potential to have that visited. I assume you're talking about the school park sites and the minimum size required for that. There could be potentially some further discussions and amendments to those as well.
Okay, thank you. You have any follow-ups
Yeah,
on that?
two quick kind of follow-up questions that hopefully could be answered sort of in tandem. And can you just walk us through exactly the steps that the township goes through in cooperation with the school district to actually acquire the site? Is it them going out and acquiring the site using our money, provincial money? How does that work? And is there the legislative permission, so to speak, for the township to potentially add it into a CAC bucket that, because I know we have the DCC program to help with school site acquisition, but since this is going to be such a priority with so many schools, is there another avenue to potentially raise more funds to make sure we have enough schools?
Through your worship to Councillor Pratt, I'd actually defer through the entire process to Mr. Back in there.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's an interesting question because there is, of course, the school board's able to levy, I guess, a DCC charge really for schools, amenity fee, if you will, and they've been very reluctant through provincial legislation to do so. It's very, very small, very modest. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure we'd have jurisdiction to create our own CAC or DCC for this purpose. I think we would have to defer to the province. It could be a request that's made, but it's not something that I think we can do unilaterally. As well, it would come down to the, I think the timing of it comes down to the province's policies as well. Why we're being cautious is that the province's general policy is that they do not want to see schools built, at least until there's actually the students present. That makes it a bit of a conundrum for us because we can actually preserve land space, but there's no timeline then for the school to actually be built until such time as the students are present. And that can be very challenging for municipalities or for the development community if they're waiting for long periods of time. In that regard, then, the general practice would be, in theory, the province would be ahead of the market, would be buying property as they need, as they see, as according to these plans. They would then be acquiring it and being in a position to build. As a point of fact, what generally happens is they generally trail, and what we've been trying to do is designate or identify parcels that could be used for it and try to work with the development community to somehow either preserve those through option agreements or to actually try to fund them, in some cases, in very few cases, by the township actually acquiring the property and at a later date transferring it to the province. That, of course, puts a significant strain on our resources, and we're kind of reluctant to do that, but if we have to, we will.
Mr. Bracken, I'm going to ask about that process a bit more because I think it's important for the public to see this. Right now, the Ministry of Education, you and I have discussed this on multiple occasions. Ministry of Education could purchase up all the land it requires for housing it's saying it wants as quickly as possible. That is being projected to be built over time. It could buy up these 9 elementary school sites at $2.5 million an acre, or it could wait 10 years and pay $8 million an acre. And you and I have discussed that they're quite happy to wait and pay $8 million an acre. And the challenge being their typical government conundrum, why buy it today when you can buy it tomorrow for 3 times the price? And that's a challenge that we're all facing as we try to build out these neighborhoods. That'd be fair?
Well, that's correct.
Yeah. It's just the situation that we're in.
Well, yeah, and I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about school sites for our local students, there's only so much we can depend on the province to do. I think it'd be helpful to be a bit more proactive locally to try and make sure we have these sites. And like you say, we dealt with it in Willoughby, where we're now trying to pay for things that are much, much higher cost because we didn't do it proactively. So I appreciate the comments, Mr. Bracken, and I'll hopefully take that under consideration moving forward. Maybe it is a nicely worded letter to the province.
Well, on that we agree because last council, under Mayor Froese, we were quite united, Councillor Kuntz, I recall, on acquiring a site that was available for a high school when we had no timeline for a high school, and the local government stepped in and made that happen. And that's the reason that we're projected now to have a high school site at all in that location where we have it. So I think we can do that. The challenge is, can we do it everywhere with the resources that we have? But we have done that in the past, and I think we can do it again. Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, that concerns me a lot, hearing that they wait until the population's there and then they want to build a school when the school board is telling us it takes 3 to 5 years to build a school. So if you're going to have the population in place and then you're going to start building a school, you're going to be lagging at minimum 3, probably 5 years behind for the schools.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thinks people are talking about schools. I think it's a good discussion. The interesting other point, I mean, and I really do want to compliment the last council on some big purchases, and with big purchases come big risk, as Mr. Bracken has indicated. It's our money first before we get reimbursed by the province. The next step is to actually get them, once we have the land and they bought the land, to build the school. That's where we're stuck sometimes with as well. So very good discussion regarding this.
Thank you. So any other questions? No? Okay, so I see no other questions on these presentations, so thank you again, Mr. Cooner. I also want to thank Mr. Nelson, Mr. Chu, your entire team, Mr. Chu, on these. We talked the other day, you've been at this since what, 2007, I think you've been working on these? Yeah, so a long road, and we're not through it yet, and I'm looking forward to the feedback from the public and members of council and the conversations to continue over the next 30 days. It's a long road to get here, and I appreciate all the work in different versions and all the different inquiries and questions you responded to since the election. Thank you again for that.
Thank you, Worship.
Thank you.
And I wish my colleagues good luck on the next presentation for Horn Pit.
Thank you, Jan. Is your laptop?
So move on here, D2. Can I get a motion to receive those presentations? How about that? Moved by Councillor Kuntz, seconded by Councillor Martins. All those in favor? Presentations are received. D2, Horn Pit. Mr. Zwag.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're going to start off with Mr. Zwag, but we, to repeat Mr. Chan's comments and what Councillor Ferguson was alluding to, Mr. Zwag is hoping that you'll be merciful today. In my years, I know that's It happens, but let's say I think today it might be needed more so than many. I say that because Horn Pit is a very contentious topic, and I wanted to give you some assurance then in terms of where we actually sit with Horn Pit. Right now, it's a development concept. The Horn Pit process has to follow the community plans, the neighborhood plans. In theory, we could get out in front of them, but that would mean then we may be inconsistent with the plans itself. So what we're really describing here today is not so much the results, but a process where the results still have to be determined. We have some concepts, we have some background, we have some history, we have some vision, we have some direction, but it's still very much a work in progress, and is something that would be happening, we hope, fairly quickly after council gives this direction by making by providing some direction as to the neighborhood plan, so that we know where we're at with those, and from that we can extrapolate the need to achieve Horn Pit. Horn Pit's an important resource to us because it does reflect the significant land value, and that can be very important to the township in terms of achieving some of the priorities of this council in terms of some of its infrastructure needs. And it's against that backdrop I'll let Mr. Zweig start the process and chime in when needed.
And I'd like to give this some context as well, so I appreciate that from Mr. Bracken. I also want to reiterate that we're very relieved and excited, Mr. Bracken, that we're doing this in a public meeting. So I want to thank you for that. I think it's transparency's been noted to be very important to this council, and I know to management. And so I, again, very much appreciate the sensitivity around it, and very much thankful that we've now have this occurring in a public meeting. So go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Roland Zwag. I'm the Director of Public Works at the Township of Langley. The Horn Pit project has been in the books for the remediation for a number of years, and we've had a number of consultants involved. And with me here today are two members of McElhaney who are part of the planning team, environmental team, Mr. James Pernew and Victoria Salisbury, sitting over there. So they'll be helping me with any questions you may have at the end related to the planning and environmental areas. We've had numerous consultants involved, including remediation consultants, geotechnical, a number of internal departments, including property services, policy, community planning, development servicing. So it's not just engineering involved. It's been quite an undertaking process for all of us. So the presentation today is a bit of an introduction, showing a bit of the legal lot layout, some background on how Horn Pit was used over the decades. We're going to list some legislation and regulations that apply to what we're doing for the remediation and steps forward. We're going to provide some historical aerial photos, how the site has changed over the decades, some current site photos, and of course the aforementioned conceptual plan, which introduces some layout for consideration and next step. We're going to talk a bit of a summary of what the layout looks like with percentages of the site. We're going to talk about next steps, including for the project, for council, and for the public. And of course, at the end, we'll answer any questions you may have. So Horn Pit is comprised of 12 lots as shown on the plan. Interestingly, about 100 years ago, we acquired 11 of these through a tax sale bylaw. And in 1963, we acquired the 12th property. The property is bisected or bounded by 200th Street on the east, 196th Street on the west, private properties and 28th Avenue on the north, and private properties and 24th Avenue on the south. If you look at the middle south end of the property, there's a little dash line that's a right-of-way. We have a very active beaver population in the area, and that right-of-way allows us to manage basically pond levelers, some best management practices with the beaver population. So Horn Pit was used as a gravel extraction during the 1950s and 60s. We used it for municipal purposes, and then later on, after the gravel extraction ceased, it was used for municipal operations and storage. Think street lights, some pipes, some materials. The site was left, I guess, relatively unattended. So what happened over time, the low-lying areas filled in, and they developed into the pond and wetlands you see today. The reclamation of the site started at the end of 2016, early 2017, with the intent to restore the site to the original elevation of the surrounding areas. So there's a number of regulations and legislation that we've been adhering to over the last 6 years, including federal, such as the Fisheries Act, the Species at Risk Act, such as provincial, such as Water Sustainability Act, the Riparian Areas Act, and of course some of our local requirements. The next series of slides will show you some of the progression of the site, starting in the 1970s all the way to current. I'll go through these relatively quickly.
And Mr. Zweig, perhaps I could just comment, because these are kind of a personal interest to myself, because I should disclose to council, my father was actually a heavy equipment operator, so much of the work you've seen done here was actually done by him. And I might as well totally confess that many a family Christmas tree came from some of these areas on this property. But I was of such a young age, I don't think any intent can be attributed to myself that would violate any rules. Is that right, Mr. Chan? He's available on retainer if needed. But the interesting thing about these are not really the relevance to the development, but really just how the site has changed over time. From 1978, you can see some of the early work that was done, Mr. Zweig, next one. And you can just continue to see continued changing in patterns. And I can tell you why that was. It was simply going to where the gravel was and taking it away. And some of that caused depressions that became wet. And sometimes it was filled in. Sometimes someone took the odd Christmas tree. And as you went forward through those years, you can see a significant change until we come to the current site, which is, I think, 2021, Mr. Zweig. And that's relevant. I'll turn it back to Mr. Zweig at that point, because that shows really the area where structural fill was utilized in conjunction with our consultant's determination of the appropriate areas to fill, so that it could have some future development potential. Mr. Zweig, back to you.
Thank you. So the last area we have in our system is from 2021. Some more works have occurred since then. So we've taken some current site photos to give you kind of a quick look at what it looks like today. I know some of you have toured the site, but maybe not all of you. So the first set of photos is basically we're standing at the northwest corner of the site. And for this first photo, we're looking at west, so towards 196th Street. You can see the buffer of trees that still exist on the Horn Pit site. The second picture, again, standing at the same location, but now we're looking northeast towards 28th Avenue and 200th Street. Again, note the buffer of trees that currently still exist on the property. The next set of photos is standing on the northeast corner of the site, and we're looking eastbound, so towards 200th Street, and you can see the development that's occurring across the street. And this photo is basically showing the same viewpoint from the northeast corner, but looking south, so towards the wetlands, towards the Little Campbell River, towards the trees, and towards 24th Avenue. The last set of photos, we're basically standing at the south end of the wetlands. The first photo shows we're looking north towards the wetlands, towards the remediated area, towards the trees, and towards 28th Avenue. And this is looking south at the south end of the wetlands. As mentioned before, we've got a very active beaver family operating there. And despite our best efforts to install a pond leveler, to work with them, they were smart enough to block the pond leveler. So right now the water level is pretty high. My staff are telling me it's about 3 feet higher than it usually is because of the beaver activity that the pond leveler is in place. So I'll give you some context. So we have about 70.5 acres of property. We've got an opportunity, as Mark said, to do a variety of things. Using the principles that was just outlined in the neighborhood plans with 4,000 square foot minimum lot sizes, with some public amenity space, we put our minds to a first draft concept that we're ready to present to Mayor and Council and the public. So this slide will be up for quite a bit, so I'll just go through some of the aspects of the conceptual layout. On the north half of the site are the R1A lots. Those are basically 4,000 square foot minimum lot size, a combination of front and rear loading, and a yield of approximately 120 lots. As you can see, there's an east-west corridor, essentially 27th Avenue, that bisect the north-south and the south side of the site. On the west side, bordering 196th Street, we show a series of row homes, townhomes, minimum lot size of about 3,500 square foot, and a yield of 22. We currently show these to be rear loaded. Again, there's an opportunity to do a variety of things, front loading, rear loading, configurations and layout. These are just a conceptual layout. Of course, a large part of the site is environmental area. It equates to approximately 45% currently. That is riparian area, wetlands, and setback areas. On the south side of 27th Avenue, on the east side of the property, there's 3 areas with colors. The red, we call it the light brown and the dark brown. We tried to provide a couple of options for council and public to consider for this area. No detailed design had been completed, no layouts have been prepared. The first one being a fire hall, approximately 2 acres in size, that would service the residents of the Township of Langley and City of Surrey here. Next one being the light brown housing, which we call non-market housing. We have no preconceived notion of what it is, but it could be a variety of forms. We're looking about setting aside 3 acres for that purpose. The dark brown is approximately 6 acres in size, and we've labeled it currently row homes. Could be fee simple, could be strata, could be townhouses, could be a variety of different housing options that the council and public may see fit. And lastly, we show a conceptual detention pond environmental area. It has not been sized, but currently it shows about 3.3 acres, just to give you a perspective of what it could look like. There are some environmental features we could add to the entire development: infiltration, rain gardens. So these are just some high-level areas to look at. With respect to greenways, this lot shows 3 greenways, all running north-south, one being on 196th Street. I don't think I have a cursor left, do I? There it is. So there's a greenway running north-south on 196, one on 200th Street, and one about the mid-block here that would connect to 20th Avenue to the multi-use pathway that is currently proposed to, I guess, take out the perimeter of the wetlands pond area. So I just wanted to summarize this layout, and I'll go back to this layout as needed for questions. It's kind of summarizing the areas that we are currently showing in our layout. Again, the environmental area being about 45% of the site, or 31.4 acres. Then the developable area, which had the layout, approximately being 34%. Then the row house area, which is that dark brown property, approximately 9%. The non-market housing at 3 acres, being 4%. The fire hall at 2 acres, being approximately 3%. And then a detention pond at about 3.3 acres, or 5%, totaling up to 70.5 acres, or 100%. And again, all conceptual.
Roland, if we could just go back once, just very briefly, because I think it's worth just visiting. The yellow areas tend to show single-family lots, front-loaded or rear-loaded. The extreme, I think, show, or the ends sometimes show townhomes or row homes. But the other areas are purposely not defined because there needs to be more work to be done in terms of both access and egress and the ultimate uses. I think the greenways are a good attempt to integrate some of the environmental considerations, but you can see a significant portion of the site, I think 45% is going to the green infrastructure. And Mr. Zweig, in terms of the actual servicing of it, then let's address with that. We anticipate this would be both served by water and sewer, I believe. And I think one of the pipes is actually already in place, awaiting just the utilization.
That's all correct. Yeah. So where we're at, we are not done with the remediation. The remediation is ongoing and progressing. In the near future, we'll be completing an updated survey with elevations and grades of the fill. And then under the Water Sustainability Act, as part of the filling process, we have some requirements to do with respect to planting in the setback areas that can be completed once the filling and remediation has been completed. We have to do ongoing monitoring and maintenance. Every time there's a significant rainfall, we mobilize to make sure the erosion sediment control measures are working and functioning as intended. And of course, why we're here today is to get some council feedback, both on the conceptual layout, some of the areas we've highlighted in different colors, and getting some direction on what type and form of public consultation council would like to see. All with the intent to report back at the end with some or multiple preferred options, costing, and next steps. So with that in mind, that's the end of my presentation, and I will go back to the layout because I assumed I'll be.
Can you confirm any pending plans for public consultation? I believe there's been some discussion of it being presented for feedback to run concurrent with the open house for the neighborhood plans.
I can jump in, Your Worship. Yes, we could do that, but we'd want to be certain councils okay with that. I think that was our original intention, but that and other levels or forms of consultation is something we look forward to some advice on.
Okay, so that's something council could consider under F1 potentially if the plans proceed. Okay. Do you have any other thoughts about what other kind of council feedback you're looking for today? Or we can certainly take this away and see what happens under F1 potentially.
I think at this point, any feedback would be good.
Okay.
Good and negative feedback as far as some of these concepts. There's a lot of flexibility that could be had here to balance the needs. Thank you.
I have some questions from council then. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Oh, just really quick question on you mentioned the services. You I've been watching this for I've driven by it hundreds of times and visited it a couple of times as well. First of all, how far are you away from actually finishing the actual reconstruction or rehabilitation of the site? That's the first one. How far? Give me a time.
Thank you. Through your worship, through Councillor Ferguson, if you're referring to the remediation process, I think we'd probably be approximately 90% complete, depending on the ultimate layout with respect to detention ponds and how much filling more. It could be higher, it could be lower, but that's an approximate guess right now.
I noticed it a lot. I live in the area. I noticed a lot of the heavy equipment's gone now. I think they got a minimum of it now. My next one, my final question is your utilities. You've got is it water, sewer, and drainage, or all of the drainage will be put together, I guess, as development occurs, if I may, through the chair?
Thank you, through your worship. The only services that have been installed to date is essentially along the proposed 27th Avenue corridor, the water, sewer, and the storm. They're dry lines, they're not in use.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah. Can you tell me a few things here? How much money has been spent on the remediation to this point?
Mr. Bracken, do you know that?
Ballpark.
Mr. Zweig? Well, what I know is that we were able to, I think, get even though a structural fill, we were actually paid a modest amount for each load, and that that fee actually offset some of the costs. But for the actual remediation before any improvements, do you have a net number?
I do not have a specific number.
No,
Through
ballpark.
your worship, as Mark referenced, we had an agreement with the contractor to fill the site in return for some relatively minor compensation. Most of our costs were associated with consultants to do the remediation.
So I think the challenge there is, sometimes hesitation to provide ballparks in case they're wrong.
Okay.
So you could collect that information and get that to council? Yeah, that'd be all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But we should know, services, it's not cheap to put in sewer, water, and storm. If we can get those numbers as well. I guess what I'm trying to get at is the costs that we put into the remediation, like how many units are on this conceptual plan right now?
The layout portions is approximately 142.
142.
And then the row home area, again, depending on what the desire is, fee simple strata could be another 50 to 70.
Okay. Sorry, can you take it back? I noticed that it looks like there's a greenway that actually runs east-west in front of the non-market fire hall and row home, or is that just...
That's correct. I missed that one in my presentation.
Okay. Well, it's important to include it because that's great. I think my challenge with this is, hearing the presentations on the, the recharging of the aquifer and stuff like that in the region, that the north side of Horn Pit is the most, beneficial area for that recharge. My gut, I haven't had time to digest any of this yet. It's all pretty, we've only had a few days. I'm not totally enjoying that north side of, the south side of 27th Avenue, that strip there. If we, that would be my preference, would be to eliminate that. But again, also knowing that we've spent substantial amount of money in this area, that's why I'm kind of digging into the costs. If that's something that we can save that area to be part of the SPIA area, that would be, kind of my gut reaction just looking at this right now. Yeah. Sorry, that's my comments at this point.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation, and hopefully I'll come across as nice in these questions. And kind of going off of something that Councillor Van Popta brought up in regards to the south side of 27th versus the north side. I'm assuming that as the work was being done on the conceptual plan that we were seeing, there was other kind of concepts come up, created, or valuations potentially on what the return might be for this concept versus another. So I'm wondering if there was any concept created where the south side of 27th, which is adjacent to the environmentally sensitive areas, was primarily preserved, and what sort of density increases we'd have to see on the north side of 27th in order to get the same level of return as we're seeing in this type of concept with single family front loaded on the south side of 27th.
Okay, thank you through your
First
worship.
question.
Yeah,
Just as for clarity purposes, when you talk about the south side, I think you're focusing on the lots in the cul-de-sac and south of 27th?
Yeah, typically for myself,
Yeah.
that would be the main area of, I'll say, concern. But obviously the row house section, and then I believe those are single family row houses on the far west side there as well, in the lighter brown.
Whole area. So, what we can say is that many, I guess, alignments were considered, and it was a bit difficult because we're also trying to predict what the neighborhood plan might look like, and some of the suggestions that you're making might not be entirely in alignment because of the density. So we tried to come to an average density that would tend to work out. But having said that, I would think that that would represent roughly that area 1/4 to perhaps up to a third, but more likely about 1/4 of the site. So that would reduce the revenue by about 1/4. And if you wanted to look at the value of that, it can vary entirely significantly on the market. But I mean, I think the low end was probably something in the neighborhood of 60 to 65 million. The other was about 80 to 85 million. In both of those numbers are probably wrong. They're probably just a range, and as the mayor said, they are a ballpark, and that's the risk with using them. But I say that because if you take 25 to 30% of it off, then you can begin to get a sense of what the values would look like.
Okay, thank you. And then as another follow-up, just in regards to the environmental pieces, because it's fantastic that we're protecting the wetland and we're trying to protect the river as well. And I see the environmental area is 31.4 acres. But those are areas that we'd have to protect anyways because of federal and provincial regulations. And so one of my sort of concerns with the concept as we're seeing it here is that we're not really trying to go above and beyond and actually enhance a lot of what we could be enhancing here. And so you hear people in the industry or in the field talk a lot about how when you let nature sort of run its course and take over, it does a lot of good. And I think you kind of touched on that with the wetlands and the ponds sort of creating themselves over time. And so in your opinion, or in the consultant's opinion, sort of how much of the site, now that we've rehabilitated it to a development type of standard, would be able to sort of rehabilitate itself or be worked on with, partners in the community to really restore a lot of the natural areas? Is most of the site sort of only good for development now, or is there a possibility of actually going out and enhancing parts of the property?
yeah, thank you through your worship.
I'm going to actually defer to Mr. Backen on that one. That seems like more of a, of course, any land can be made a park and preserved. Mr. Backen, you want to address that?
Yeah, I guess we start with the beginning. Could more lands have been carved out from the green space? And the answer is there was some early concepts that showed with compensation we could likely have significantly increased the developable area, but that would have meant compensation in other areas. Of course, the Little Campbell is the primary matter that had to be protected, and then there were some of the wetlands, as you referenced. But because of the history, the wetlands have been very variable, and they're not naturally occurring. So there was some opportunity that we decided not to pursue. I'm not quite sure one could say we have to protect those anyways. There were some options, we just didn't actually pursue them at that point. As we advance then to the next level, then in terms of the protections that are being put into place, we've tried to go beyond, and I would say modestly, once you take that green area, we could go beyond that modestly, I suppose, and look at some of the benefits associated with that. But it's something that we were trying to meet provincial, requirements. The township was in the midst of, considering its position vis-a-vis the riparian area and the SPIA regulations. So we were trying to be consistent with those and not be a bit more ambitious. Now, could we have done so? Certainly. That kind of goes to your last question, which is, well, could we, with the area that's been filled with structural fill, could we actually do something more there to allow it to become more environmentally friendly? And the answer is certainly. I mean, it's all a matter of cost or loss of revenue. We could do so. The site wasn't designed for that, but council could take any of the areas and provide some directions for additional green space or parks. And one of the things we've actually even wrestled with is, well, perhaps this is a potential school site. If we were to use the detention pond as an area that was perhaps in a tank and underground, you then actually have the potential for a site there as well. So there is many options that can be considered as this going forward, and I think part of that will be illuminated through some of the public consultation process in terms of the needs that we hear and experience.
Yeah, you sort of stole my thunder there, Mr. Backen, in regards to another question. And is the policy that we have about combining a neighborhood park and a school site. Is that provincially required, or is that a policy of our own?
That's a process. I wouldn't even say it's a policy. I think it's a practice we've undertaken, and it was developed many years ago in a way to encourage the development of school sites in the township. We were always struggling to get the attention of the province in years gone by, when we perhaps weren't growing quite as fast, and that was one of the ways to induce and enhance their desire when the situation was that they would pay for the parks as a school site, we'd pay for the park site. I can say that in many communities, the school board is responsible to pay for both the park, well, the playing fields, I won't call it a park, the playing fields and the school site, and that often leads to a caliber of field that is perhaps not quite what the community expects or demands. It also leads to difficulties in construction because, of course, the province then looks at the total bill for a potential site. And as we know, schools, even elementary schools, are probably running around $40 to $50 million now. And if land's running at $2.5 to $3 million an acre, and it takes 10 acres for a combined site, it becomes a pretty daunting number very quickly.
So with the I think it's 6.2 or 6.4, 6.4 that was set aside in this concept for row house. Typically, we look at about a 5-acre site as the minimum for the just school portion of a combined site. Is that correct?
Historically, but there's been some new developments where with with schools that may be 2 stories as opposed to single stories, we'll call it densification of the school. There are some sites that are perhaps as small as 2.5 acres. So there's that potential that could be utilized as well.
Thank you. And then just as a final question, in the neighborhood plans that we just had a presentation on that we'll be debating later, within the Fernridge Community Plan, there's, I believe, 3 neighborhood parks identified as required, and then 1 nature neighborhood park site identified. And in the stages of planning that we've gone through already for Fernridge, were there any particular sites that were identified as any particular suitable for the nature neighborhood park?
The short answer is yes, and some of them are township owned and some are not, so I should be cautious. I guess I would say the characteristics of those sites are generally going to be treed and probably historically treed. There's other sites that may have other enhancements to them that may be of value, but to discuss specific sites I think might be a bit premature at this point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Councillor Bailey?
Well, I'm going to start off extremely pleased because I see the fire hall there, and not only is the fire hall in a very good location, but for access, especially north-south, but it's a big enough chunk that you can put the fire hall on and still do some functional drills in that. Really pleased to see the non-market housing going in behind it. That is a focus of some of the things that go on now with fire halls and supportive housing, and that supportive housing in township is sorely lacking, and glad to see that. One of the questions I've got is talking to the people who know about the environmental aspects of this is the water recapture. So I'm looking at the urban part up top. Is there any way that instead of punching the storm sewer out and running it straight into the water that we can grab that water and help it refill into the wetlands?
Yeah, thank you, through your worship. Those are some of the options we could consider, like infiltration gardens, rain gardens. We've done those historically in the township. So yes, those are options. And
I love seeing that detention pond exactly where it is. I think that'll help an awful lot with that river that I love because I fished it so often when I was young. Now, looking at the older pictures, before the gravel pit, was this, and they talk about the part of the river east of 200th there, that it goes dry. Before the gravel pit, is there any historical information on what that part of the river did? If this wasn't wetlands years and years and years ago, did the river in this area go dry?
Thank you, through your worship. We're not able to find those records predating the gravel pit operation. So, but remember, before the site was mined, the elevation was much higher. So those wetlands and ponds were not there before the gravel extraction commenced.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions from council, so I'll ask for some council to consider, give some direction on this under F1. So thanks again, Mr. Swag. Thanks again, Mr. Backen. I know that this has been going on for quite a while, and again, glad to have it out in the public meeting. Reports to council. I'm going to get a motion to receive that presentation. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Martin. Show of hand, all those in favor of receipt. That carries unanimously. E1, reports to council. Either that, or why don't we, since we're at 3 o'clock, why don't we take a break and come back at 3:15?
John, this is my director, and John, he's our co-chair of the AEC. Jason Chu is my manager. So you get to participate on our tour, farm tour, but you can't go because you're going on your, because you're going to be on a cruise. I'm jealous.
Okay, we'll get back underway. Reports to council, E1, soil deposit and removal application for 22865 14th Avenue to exempt them from the soil deposit based on their LC approval. Moved by Councillor Pratt. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on E1? Seeing none, call the question on E1. That carries unanimously. E2, Nathan Creek Sediment Pond Improvements. Council authorized $600,000 to proceed with that carry forward project. Get a mover. Moved by Councillor Kuntz, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Any discussion on E2? Seeing none. Oh, there's one. Hold on. Councillor Kuntz, go ahead.
Yeah, only should this go forward and be approved that we could let the Fraser Valley Diking Association know that this is going to happen, because that was one of their concerns.
Mr. Bagan, you can take care of that, please. Great. Call the question on E2. That carries unanimously. E3, Health and Safety, second quarter. Council authorized up to $8,081,000 for a variety of projects that have some urgency. Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Councillor Van Popte, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions through your worship to staff. The Fort Langley Community Sewer Park upgrade, the sewer lift there. Since we've already got works going on design for the park, is that something that is that septic field already pre-chosen? Like, do we already know where that is, or should we be coordinating those two tasks together, the park design and the septic field?
Thank you for your worship. I believe you're referring to the Fort Langley sewer upgrades, the lift station?
Yeah.
Yeah, they will be coordinated with any planning that may happen in the park. In addition, this is a requirement of Fraser Health to service the spray park that was installed last year.
So how is the spray park operating without it?
It's using temporary rock pits, was a conditional approval from the Fraser Health Authority.
Okay. So you're working with the Parks Department then on the lotion. Okay, perfect. That was one question. I noticed that the RCMP detachment generator, part of the budget's coming out in 2024. Actually, the bulk of the money is coming out of the 2024. Is that to kind of coordinate with the other works that it got?
Can we clarify that, Ms. Ruff? Was that coming from the RCMP reserve?
That will come from the RCMP reserve.
So that could be an immediate disbursement rather than a future disbursement?
It would depend on the timing of the work.
Okay.
Is that why it's spread out that way? You think
Not
that it's
sure,
going to happen
yeah.
next year?
That's my assumption on that one.
Okay, perfect. How much money is in the Climate Action Fund?
I believe it's about 800,000, but Ms. Ruff can confirm.
Okay.
Ms. Ruff, I think that's, do I have that all right?
$750,000.
No, it's close.
Okay. All right, that's good enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, I'm seeing in here an awful lot of these, well, all of them are all critical, but I'm really glad to see that paying attention to not getting behind, especially regarding work-safe requirements for the firefighting turnout gear and SCBA. God, I better not get that one wrong. Mass. A lot of times, departments sometimes can fall behind on these, and it puts the firefighters at risk. So I'm really glad to see them paying attention to this.
Great. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And through yourself to staff, with this list and all being listed as critical, can you explain or walk us through what the asset management plan that the township has is? And is there a master document, so to speak? Is there a running list outside of the budget cycle that we keep so that council can be apprised, or at least ourselves go out and figure out what assets might be getting near the time to replace or repair?
Thank you, through your worship. I appreciate the question. The Township of Langley has a number of asset management programs for essentially all of our infrastructure. The one that's probably the least mature is our green infrastructure, our natural assets. But if you're referencing to our facilities, our building envelopes, our stormwater, pavement management system, we have a number of programs in progress. And typically or historically, we would request annual funding to do the necessary replacements as they come up. And yeah.
So is there a document or a internal link that we would have access to that we could see the list of projects that you have at any given day?
Thank you, through your worship. I appreciate the clarity question. Our asset management are high-level documents that essentially show infrastructure and then broken down by condition rating in percentages, kilometers, ranges. They then get further refined into our 5-year capital program, so a 5-year financial plan based on an annual basis. So we have lists available for many of them that could be shared with council if so needed.
Sounds like you and I have a couple meetings coming up then. Thank you.
Councillor Impopto?
Yeah, just further to that, sometimes it's nice, I noticed that the one air conditioning unit, I believe it was at Walnut Grove, you know, there's consistent or a considerable amount of repair work that's happened over the last 3 years. So if we can see those things kind of coming up, coming up for regular repair or replacement, that would be good. I assume that you would already have, kind of the life cycle of mechanical equipment like that. But if we can see it before it reaches critical, that's good information for us to have as well.
Great. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on E3. That carries unanimously. F1, bylaws for first and second reading. Proposed Booth Fernridge Rin neighborhood plans, bylaw number 5796, 5797, and 5798 for a number of motions related to move this process forward. Moved by Councillor Ferguson. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rint. Councillor Van Popte, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll be voting in support of this right now, and that is because I want it to go to the public as soon as possible. I want the public to be able to have input on this, and I want to hear what people have to say. I've only had this for 4 days as well, so I have a lot to chew on. So I'm in good faith giving my vote in favor of this so that I can really get into it over the next couple of weeks and just make sure that everything that I'm hearing is addressed in there. So I'll be supporting it.
Great. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is actually the document we're talking about today. It's a lengthy document, but I've been waiting 5 terms for this particular. I know that Mr. Chu and myself, our hair was a different color when we began this process, as well as Mr. Nelson as well. And I appreciate all the work staff has done. This council obviously has a myriad of work to do for this. There's an awful lot of review and re-review. We also have to find out how we proceed in the future with things like recreation, schools, libraries, nature corridors, greenways, parks, and the list goes on. It's Brookswood's turn. It's time for Brookswood to move on, and as the province has indicated, they're looking for housing, affordable housing, mixed-use housing, many other different types of housing as I speak. I know that we've had a lot of challenging comments from the community over the years, but I believe now is the time to build a complete community. And I compliment my other colleagues to talk about things like protection and other services. I'm sure that they are very involved with that as well. So I think it's important to move on. I also believe it's very, very important to educate and to let the public know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, Mr. Mayor, this is certainly something I'm looking forward to progressing forward as the public gives us their input. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question, Mr. Bracken, or maybe directed towards Mr. Cooner in regards to the staff report mentions the Brookswood amenity, Arterial Road amenity program separate from the Willoughby version, but it's not outlined in the motions here along with the other amenity policy. So do you need an amendment for that, or can you just take it under direction that that'll run forward? That'll be at the open house and outlined as we move forward.
They're saying we can just simply take the direction, Your Worship. Thank you.
And that can come at third reading, presumably. We can see that policy, we can see that as part of the motion in the agenda at that time?
That's
Okay,
correct.
Great. So we don't need that amendment. And then, for council's information, I'd like to call the question on this and then to discuss Horn Pit separate from this. We don't need to amend this for Horn Pit. We'll come back to it after this. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. That was one of my questions to do with Horn Pit. Similar to Councillor Van Pop, I'll be supporting this at first and second with a bit of an asterisk because one clear way that I think myself and a lot of my council colleagues are aligned on is that I think it might never be too late to do the right thing. And one issue that I did support now Mayor Woodward on last term as an observer was the need to phase Brookswood. And so I won't do it at this meeting because I want to have the public be able to participate in a really fulsome way on all three neighborhood plans so that we don't have to repeat this process maybe 3 more times. But I think at the next opportunity, I'd like to see if we can potentially phase the implementation of these neighborhood plans so we get it done right.
Yeah, we can certainly entertain that at third reading. Just would ask that you bring rationale for which plans you're going to pursue and which you're going to leave behind. Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, I too am going to support this. I do look forward to hearing from the public. As a young girl, my parents owned property on 208 Street, and all the neighbors thought that, oh, very soon it's going to get developed, very soon. That was probably 50 some odd years ago. Of course, that development went across over to Walnut Grove, which is now, a beautiful neighborhood. Everyone loves their neighborhood and loves to live in Walnut Grove. I'm really interested in the next phase of discussions on this, keeping my mind open, and yeah, so those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll call the question here in a second. I had a couple of comments in regards to getting to this stage. Again, I want to thank the staff. I know that there's been some cars in the parking lot late at night, weekends, meeting the timeline that this council laid out last November in regards to a number of work items that community policy and planning is addressing. So I want to thank you for bringing these forward and bringing them forward with the revision based upon the economic assessment that this council asked for. The way I'm going to start framing this, I think, over the next 30 days is, of course, we have a number of options for council to consider here coming up after the public input. Can do nothing. We could sit here for 5 more years and just simply say, Willoughby first. Mr. Bragg, remember the days when it was Willoughby first, and delay it and slow it down and finish Willoughby first. That would be one option. Another option is to go back to the draft versions that were circulated last year, which I think has been demonstrated in the report to us this weekend that they're not economic. Some refer to it as the urban land reserve. We could certainly pass plans that aren't economic and won't go anywhere. We have 2 of those in Willoughby. The 2 newest ones in Willoughby are not economic and not going anywhere. That's certainly an option if we want to approve plans knowing that they won't be built. That's certainly an option. This draft decreased densities, which I think some people are starting to review and consider what is going to come in exchange for that. And if we add more density, I think with this plan, we've seen an economic way to deliver single family but increased tree preservation. Real world economics on how that's going to be achieved, not producing a version of Willoughby 2.0. Which I think we've all heard loud and clear. Plans for mature tree preservation, plans for how to address major gaps in infrastructure, especially within roads and sidewalks and bike lanes. How are we going to ensure that that doesn't repeat itself? Plans for schools, not just for elementary. I think we've heard about that today. How is that going to be the case where maybe we do have a look at middle and high so that we're not expected at the last minute to jump in and buy up land at a $75 million borrowing bylaw to bail out the provincial government, essentially, to ensure our community gets a high school, which is still we're waiting for. Plans for public safety, plans for recreation, childcare, a number of items that I think we're catching up with now in some of the areas of Willoughby. How are we going to produce and ensure a Brookswood plan for Brookswood residents? And I think we're getting closer with this version. So I'm looking forward to seeing it go to the public and hear these concerns, which I'm sure we're going to hear about delivering smaller lots, which are still creating a single-family neighborhood, but what is going to occur in exchange for that? What will the CAC program look like? How will tree preservation actually be delivered? So we don't end up with the loss of that character in Brookswood, but maybe there's some higher densities that have to come along with that. Reverting back to the 7,000 square foot, 10,000 square foot option version is an option. I think that will lead to what we've already seen occur under the last council with the people that were allowed to proceed with development under the older plan, not waiting for the neighborhood plans. I think we've seen what that looks like, and I don't want to see that for the rest of Brookswood. So I would take on the responsibility of finding a Brookswood plan for Brookswood residents that will not allow what we're seeing currently on 208 and 32 to occur any further. So that would be the leadership that I'd be looking for this council to provide. So with that, Councillor Ferguson, go ahead. You can have the last word.
Mr. Mayor, perhaps you can help me, or maybe even staff, if I may, through the chair to you or the staff. Is the Premier did make an announcement about housing and density. Have you got any further, or would you believe it's important for as we move into to the Brookswood Fernridge area to take into consideration some of his comments, if I may?
Yeah, so my understanding is that we're going to be getting more information about that in the fall, real specifics, homes for people, not much of a name. Again, pretty PDFs without much detail. And what kind of exemptions are we going to see? Is it appropriate to require 3 dwelling units of us on a 4,000 square foot lot? I sure hope not. Is it acceptable to require us to go into Walnut Grove and allow people to have 4 dwelling units when we're growing at twice the rate of our regional projections? We're not one of the municipalities, we're not the North Shore, where we're refusing to grow. And so I'm really hoping that we see some exemptions and some processes where some of these rules don't apply to greenfield municipalities like ourselves. We have to wait for those to come out, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. With that, call the question on F1. That carries unanimously to proceed to the open house and for the public hearing. So I'm going to stick with F1 here. I'm going to talk about Horn Pit a little bit. If there's anybody who wants to speak to Horn Pit and what we may want to do before considering a motion, now would be the time. Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think obviously this was a conceptual plan that we saw today. I think it would be valuable to go to the public with several different conceptual plans, if that wasn't already the idea, and show them exactly what we will be paying for with the developable areas that we decide to develop on this site versus what institutional or what not-for-profit uses we could be using, because I think that I don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, and I want to make sure we get Horn Pit right, and I want to make sure that the public has the whole range of options to give us the best idea of what they want for this site.
Yeah, take that under advisement. Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to achieve what I'm looking for. But what I'll be looking into in the next couple of weeks is ways that we can, the zoning in the Horn Pit area has slightly different requirements in terms of permeable surfaces and things like that. So I don't know if it's policy or if it's somehow creating a subset neighborhood plan for Horn Pit. I don't know. I'll be looking into that over the next couple of weeks.
That's great. So I think one option versus range of options. So I'm gonna move a motion that we take the options that were presented here today to council and provide those to run concurrent to the public open house on the 25th and a public input opportunity for Horn Pit on the 29th. Now the difference with the public input opportunity is it's not a public hearing, so input can continue after the public input opportunity for Horn Pit. So we could consider input on this specific version and then consider whether to come back with variations based on input. I would hesitate to create a bunch of different versions and then get feedback on multiple versions and then try to address that at this council table. So we could look at input on this concept to consider variations after that. That'd be one option. The other option would be to vote this down and direct staff to create more options. But so Ms. Bauer, do you want to read that back? Make sure you have that correct. Get a seconder to that. Just going to make sure it's captured before we move it.
Thank you. I just had to double check the dates. So we are going to have public input, or the public meeting on the 25th will include the options that have been presented plus any additional ones that are come up with before then. We will also have when we have the public hearing on the 29th, we will also be using that as a public input opportunity. But as you have outlined, because it is not a bylaw per se, it's just an opportunity, you would continue to have public input after that should
I just
people
wanted
wish.
to clarify that council understood that it's not a public hearing portion, it's
No.
public input opportunity, so you could immediately continue to consult with the public after that. That would just be a formalized time to,
It's just concurrent because we're already getting together, so we're just making it all work together.
and if people want to present rather than getting a bunch of delegations, we could provide that opportunity for the 29th for them to speak directly to council. I just want to hesitate, I didn't move that we present multiple versions that are created between now and the 25th.
Just the ones-
Just the one
just
that was
the ones, right?
presented here today.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so you want to read back that one more time?
Yeah, so when the 25th, we will be doing, concurrent with the public input opportunity for the Brookswood Fernridge plans.
Public open house on the 25th,
Yes,
right?
that's the open house on the 25th.
Yeah.
The 29th would be the scheduled public hearing, which we would have concurrent. We would also be accepting information regarding ideas on the Horn Pit.
I
Thank
want to
you.
read back the, just want to make sure this is correct because I don't want to get the minutes tomorrow morning and have it be something different. So it's a public input opportunity, which
on
is
the
very
25th.
formal, right? Not just feedback or written submissions, but people would have the opportunity to delegate specific to Horn Pit on the 29th,
Yes,
but it would not be a public hearing.
it may run concurrently, but it would not be considered part of the public hearing.
That's correct.
It would be difficult for us to organize everybody into the different places, so we will just ensure that when they come forward, they indicate which items they're speaking to and/or all of them, because we
So
have 4
that's-
bylaws.
Okay, I'm going to be very specific about the intent. So the agenda for the 29th would be public input opportunity, Horn Pit,
So you would like them separate then?
public hearing, Booth, Wren, and Fern Ridge, all separated, right? Does that
Okay.
make sense, Mr. Bracken, what we're trying to achieve here? Like, so the idea is that it's a public input opportunity specific to Horn Pit would occur on the 29th.
Okay,
So that would be replace the need for delegations leading up to that point or, thereafter for some period of time, if that makes sense what we're
yes,
trying
it
to
does.
catch.
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand now.
So now could we get the motion back again, just to
So
clarify it
it's the
again?
25th and the 29th, yes? Okay. So on the 25th, which is the public open house, individuals would be able to give information on the open house items, which would be the bylaws for Brookswood and Fern Ridge, or they would give information regarding the Horn Pit. And there will be the options that were here this evening or this afternoon will be there as well. On the 29th, we will have in that evening, we will have 2 parts. We will have the public input opportunity for Horn Pit. That will be scheduled first, as we usually do, our public input opportunity. And then second, we would have the public hearing for the 4 Brookswood Fern Ridge bylaws.
Correct. So if you want to work on a motion, because the motion's not going to be that long, and I'll go to speakers, but is there a seconder to that? I think Councillor Rint seconded that. He did beat you to it. Councillor Pratt, go ahead. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to try to formalize that down into a much quicker motion, which was to provide an open house feedback form for Horn Pit specific to this one option run at the 25th, and then for the public hearing, to run concurrent with the public hearings for a specific public input opportunity. I said it better the first time, but I think you've got that down. Okay, great. Councillor Pratt, go
Yeah,
ahead.
just 2 clarification questions. I keep hearing the word options as opposed to option.
Yes,
thrown around.
I'm also trying to clarify that it is not options, it is
Yes.
option.
It is the one we saw today.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then secondly, we talk about having the public input opportunity first. Is that before the regular meeting or before the public hearing scheduled for 7 o'clock?
It would be during the public hearing scheduled for 7 o'clock. So
Okay.
it would be 7 o'clock, we do the public input opportunity, and then as soon as that's concluded, we go into the public hearing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kunst.
Could we anticipate a very, very long night?
Based on previous experiences with Brookwood, I would be very surprised if we were out of here quickly.
So would this be the right venue?
We actually do have a plan that would accommodate about 300 people. We'll be using overflow rooms, and it's well underway, so we're quite confident we can manage it.
Okay, I know you guys are the best, so just wanted to just know for my own self. Thank
And I personally experienced that process and seen how well it can be managed, Ms. Bauer. I've personally experienced that. So, any other discussion on a Horn Pit? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Do we want to read that back again, or do you want to work on it a bit more? Yeah. Try to make it as concise as possible.
Miss Little has actually got it quite concise, thankfully. The public directs staff to present the conceptual site drawing option for Horn Pit at the public open house scheduled for May 25th and the public input opportunity scheduled for May 29th at the public hearing.
Perfect. That sounds very concise and captures it perfectly. So I'll call the question on that. And that carries unanimously. So bylaws for first, second, and third reading. G1, election and political science bylaw number 5834. Get a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Bailey. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Martins. Any discussion? Oh, Councillor Martins, you have one? Go ahead. Councillor Martins, go ahead. Just get this dispensed with right away. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to move an amendment. Ms. Bauer, you already have the wording. I'll just
Same
read
one,
it
I
back.
think we've done a couple times
That
already.
section 7.4 be amended to read as follows. Defacing, damaging, pulling down or removing election or political signs is an offense and subject to enforcement under Canada Elections Act and or the Criminal Code of Canada.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that amendment. G1. That carries unanimously. Back to the main motion as amended. Is there any discussion on G1? Councillor Pratt.
So this issue on the surface of it, I think, seems like one of the more academic and maybe frivolous type debates that we've been having because it's, after all, just election signs. However, there's a reason why it struck such a chord with me, and that also the residents I've discussed it with, because I truly believe this goes beyond a simple question of whether we like election signs or not. I think for most people, the answer to that would be clearly no. But to me, that's not really what this is about. And I don't think that was the intent of the mover. I think it is just the consequence of the issue that we're talking about. So to me, this is about fairness. It's about equity. It's about the differences between the residents of our township who own property versus those who don't. Those who might be, rich in friends but don't have rich friends who they can lean on when it comes time to figure out where exactly they're going to put their signs up. I was fortunate enough to be elected on my second try after working hard to build my name brand, my name recognition in the community over 2 campaigns. And yes, part of that recognition came from having signs up in 2018. I could completely understand the argument about public safety because that's a priority of every single one of the members of council. And I can understand the argument about wanting to reduce waste, absolutely. But if those are the reasons behind this motion, I don't think that this half measure addresses it completely. People will still be distracted by signs on private property. And with the deep networks that come with political parties, there will still be plenty of signs made and plenty of waste created. And worse still, this is a half measure that creates a difference, and a stark difference, I think, between those who haven't reached the point in their lives where they can own anything yet, and realistically in this part of the world won't own anything, versus those who do. So what we're doing is we're telling those people who want to run because they believe they have something to give back to this community, they have something that they want to share with this community, that unless they've spent years building a network and have been silently raising money in the background, or they have the means to have their name in front of the community for years or months at a time, that they need not participate. If we don't allow any signs on public right-of-ways, but allow them on private property, that's the dynamic we're creating. I sincerely hope that I'm not the youngest member of council for the rest of the history of our township. And I really hope that this council continues to add to its diversity of opinions over the coming years. But to me, these changes make it that much harder on the next generation of community leaders to get up and get their name in the ring, and I can't support that. Is the current state of our election sign bylaw perfect? Absolutely not. But neither is the democratic process. It can get messy, it can get contentious, but it's supposed to start with an equal playing field for everybody. And I'd hoped that we could find a compromise to keep it that way, but it doesn't appear that that's the direction we're headed in. And just, in my opinion, because a municipality does something a certain way or other municipalities do something a certain way, that's not necessarily a recipe to follow. And I think there's plenty of examples of that in the discourse these days. So at the end of the day, if we're talking about public safety and environmental protection, really it makes the most sense to get rid of them entirely. I did want to thank all of the council colleagues here for a constructive debate on this one, because we all got elected to do a job, and part of that job is not always agreeing. And so I hope that we could continue to do that with the level of respect that we had in this specific debate. So in the end, if we're talking about fairness in the democratic process, I think we either make no changes or nobody should be able to put them up. I don't believe this half measure is the right way forward, and for that reason, I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's pretty clever. Rich and friends, no rich friends. That's pretty. How long did you work on that one for?
About 48 hours.
I looked at your disclosures. You seem to have plenty of rich friends. So, I mean, I think we all have an equal playing field. I do take a bit exception to this. I mean, if it's the same rules for everybody, it's an equal playing field for everyone. You raised a lot of money, and a lot of other people can't raise that money, and they weren't successful. So, I disagree on this one. Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah. Since I'm the guy that started this, I'm the guy that also has to deal with it down the line, and I've been listening very interestingly and seriously to the debate on this. And when I hear the discussion about half measures or any of that kind of stuff, I kind of look at it in a different light. I look at it as a compromise. When I hear extreme examples of either all or nothing, I can't buy into this discussion of no signs at all. Because if you want to give the ultimate advantage to incumbents, then have no signs at all. So I don't see why anyone is even suggesting the fact that you have no signs. And as I have participated in these things far too many times, they do serve a purpose. And that's why I am saying step up and convince either your supporters to step up and put it on your own private property. And when it comes to trends, I look at, and we went to the 5 surrounding municipalities. City of Surrey has no signs on public, exactly what we're proposing. City of Langley, our 2 most direct neighbors, also has no signs on public property. The city of Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows do not allow the posting of signs on public owned, leased, or operated by the local government, but do allow signs to be posted on road right-of-ways, which to me is a mystery because you want to kill people, that's a great way, is distract them with signs. And that comes from an awful lot of experience, not only pulling people out of cars, but also from educating people and an extensive amount of private enterprise people on the dangers of that. City of Abbotsford, our other neighbor to the east, says not allowed posting on public property with the exception of the boulevard in front of the property, private property where the owner has approved the placing. This is showing a trend nowadays that cities have had enough of this clustering, environmental waste, environmental pollution, that, I may be old and all that, but I am kind of green. And when you talk about banning single-use plastics, even though you can recycle these signs, let me tell you, an awful lot of them are single-use plastic and they do not get recycled, they get thrown away, and it is just adding to the environmental mess. So, I respect, especially when I hear people from other generations than myself, bringing up valued input to this kind of stuff. I don't see that that just because I own a piece of property and someone else might not, that gives me a huge advantage. It gives me an advantage of one piece of property. And my piece of property, well, people go, look at this rich guy, he's got acreage. The piece of my piece of property out in the sticks has one driveway width. And that's it. So we're talking, well, you can sit there and say there's unfairness in that. Well, I hate to tell everyone, but life is not fair. And there are some things that you just cannot correct. So you have to strike a balance. And that's what I'm looking at right here, is striking a balance. And if people want to support me, then I tell the people who support me, then show it. And I would stress that and say, put that work into your campaigns and get people who support you to step up and show it. So I'm staying with this. I've loved the debate. As some people say, I engage in it a little too much. But I think it's healthy, everyone to air their sides on the issues and say exactly where they sit. And I'm a huge believer in that. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, I won't debate Councillor Bailey on the safety issue. I think he's made that very clear. I'll just do it on the fact that I think I disagree on many of the points that Councillor Pratt has made. I think it is a fair step. I was quite young, not as young as Councillor Pratt, but quite young several terms ago, and we didn't have a lot of signs, and I don't think I got elected for signs, but what we did is we went door to door and asked people, can I please put a sign on your property? And some people said yes. They weren't my friends, and they weren't rich. They might have been rich, but I never thought of them. They were residents. And basically, I got a few signs put up, and then I had some people also help me put the signs up. And then we also, we used to stuff the cars. They don't do it anymore. People hate that, but put on your windshield. We put our brochures on those. And it rained. It used to rain a lot because they weren't nice, beautiful campaigns and weather like we had last time. It used to snow during our campaigns and rain, and I think the latest campaign was November 22nd. So you imagine what that was like. So all my brochures and me and my small team, we all got wet. And the way you do it, you do the best. You like throwing mud against the wall. You don't no guarantee anybody's ever going to be elected. You know, and I guess I'm an example because you can get defeated too. So, and a coach told him one time, sometimes you can learn more from losing than you can from winning. So the thing is, you do the best you can when you're out there. You make phone calls, you knock on doors, you get your golden newspaper, you do the best you can. But I don't think signs are the only method for getting elected. I think this is I think it's very fair. And I'll let Councillor Bailey talk about safety, but I think it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Councillor Kunst, go ahead.
Yeah, just to weigh in. So this is one of those gray areas where, you kind of wish you had a gray button because, I can see both sides. For all this talk about signs, you guys really did have a lot of signs, just going to say. I'll be happy to not see as many signs, but I'm going to vote against this just out of principle. I got elected, and I know that signs really helped me, and that's why I'm just going to vote against this.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I definitely agree that I don't think signs win elections. I think they're part of the process, and I think it is the principle of what we're saying with this motion. And you're absolutely right, life is not fair, and this motion's making it even more unfair, in my opinion. And it is ironic being told by somebody who raised almost 20 times the amount of money that I did that I raised a lot of money.
20 times? I don't know about that.
And so, if we want to talk about disclosures, that's an interesting conversation to go down. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, it's about the principle of what we're saying to people who don't own things. And that's a growing percentage of people who live in this part of the world.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the debate can go on. I appreciate the nuance of it. I agree with the gray button. I'd like a gray button on occasion. What's the half of mixture of green and red? I don't know if it's gray, but I got to look that up on the color chart. Is it purple? I don't know my colors very well. Yeah, we could be discussing signs and disclosures. I actually think looking at the disclosures, Elevate Langley had spent more signs than we did. I don't see any of them here. They're not here. So I don't know if signs are really that defining. They spent, I think I was the third least of the mayor candidates. So I think even necessarily money doesn't get you there either. So, but I think a lot of people could say that it was unfair for all kinds of different reasons. I look at the sign issue as pretty simple. My experience with multiple campaigns now is some groups get to have signs and some don't, because some campaigns will destroy them and some won't. And so I'm tired of it. That's where the perspective I'm coming from. I've seen too many campaigns where signs are absolutely mutilated en masse and the other campaigns are not. And I've seen people place signs at an intersection the day before E-Day all over the township, violating the bylaw, knowing that they can't get to it by the day. So, and there's only one or two campaigns that are doing that, and some aren't. So I think for me, it's just become a game to watch, and I think it's in the best interest of the public, it's best interest of the corporation to not be spending money every campaign. Like every election, we get a report, and every election, there's a recommendation, requesting that council scale back signs for the burden, the economic waste, the bylaw officer pulling them down in front of McLeod Park over and over and over again. Example after example after example, where I think its leadership and action is required. And other municipalities have clearly ended up in the same place. City of Surrey, City of Langley, and like I said at the CPC debate, I'm surprised to learn that elections in the City of Langley and City of Surrey are unfair. Of course they're not. So with that, I'm going to call the question on, what is this, G1? That carries with Councillor Kuntz and Councillor Pratt opposed. So K1, get a motion to receive the minutes of the Council Advisory Committee, please. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Martin. So I'll show hands on receipt of those. That carries unanimously. I'm going to move on to, I'll use the machine for this one. K2, Council approve the establishment of the Building Agricultural Rural Connections Task Force for 180 days. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Call the question on K2. That carries unanimously. Councillor Kuntz, you intended to vote in favor of that? Yes. You did? Okay. Just want to double check. Try. Okay. Just double check. You're good. Yeah. Okay. Mayor and council report. I'm going to defer mine a little bit longer. You can catch up every couple of months. Although it was fun yesterday, being at the first home game of the new stadium at the soccer field at the LEC. Willoughby Community Stadium, I believe it's officially called. So it was good to see, I think, everyone there, except for one. Everybody there was believed. So it was great to see every member of council there. Oh, you missed it. You were working, I think, farming, too busy farming. That's right, yeah. So that was good to be there, and it was good to see it up close, and a mixture of Langley Walk yesterday as well. So it was a busy day for most of council. Anyone else want to say anything in Mayor and Council report? Nope. Metro Vancouver report. Anybody have anything? Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Yes, we are going into Indigenous relations this week, so we're working again with new staff and working with Indigenous folks in the region, and we are also planning for a community event sometime in the summer. So we're working on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So no other discussion. Move on to items from prior meetings. It's interesting to note, Ms. Bauer, on N, I'm Mayor Woodward, but under P, I'm Councillor Woodward. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, that was noticed, and we actually
Fix that?
we
Okay.
updated the pages.
Okay, great. So N1 from Mayor Woodward, just motion to reconsider. There's no debate on reconsideration. Just move reconsideration of N1. Councillor Ferguson? There we go. That carries unanimously. So get a motion. Ms. Bauer, just remind us again. So we have to move the motion again and second the motion again to dispose of it.
The motion is actually back on the floor.
Back on the floor.
The amendments are no longer, as
Yeah.
you reconsidered it all, so it is as the motion was originally on the floor, so that's first and second, or
Yeah.
with
So
the third reading.
The reason I'm asking is the two councillors that moved and seconded are no longer with us. So how do we account
Oh,
for
no,
that?
it has to be moved again. We are like right
Okay,
back
so
at the
we're
beginning.
moving it again. So I'll move it again. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. So now it's back on the floor without any of these amendments. So I'm going to speak to it a little bit. So if you look at these, this was brought to my attention, and I noticed it's not clear. If you read the clerk's note at the beginning, it's not clear. Ms. Bauer, do you want to mention this a little bit? I believe you watched the council meeting from then. It's not. There was some. You made the determination that it does not have third reading. But that if you look at this, it was amended, then the amendment was referred, and then third reading was carried, which is not really possible. If you want to
No,
just give a brief outline of that.
And what was going on was obviously very confusing. What ended up being the referral actually formed a replacement for the original motion in what was going on. So when they took the referral, it went down as a motion, and then they continued to amend the referral. So what actually was adopted was the amendments and going back and doing a public hearing again. The third reading was not actually adopted. It was completely changed by the time it got to the end. And Mr. Backen, when listening to it, made it very explicit to council. What was happening was the third reading was now been replaced by doing another public hearing.
Hurts the brain a little bit, so it's back on the floor. The original subdivision moved and seconded third reading for these bylaws. I don't support the subdivision. I'd ask that council, we just vote this down and allow the proponent to apply with something else. Provide some clarity both to staff and the proponent. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on N1. And the motion is defeated. Councillors Kuntz, Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Martins, Councillor Mpoptic, Councillor Pratt, Councillor Ferguson, opposed. Items brought forward, it's going to mention we did release some documents related to Sunrise Lake, and on O2, we also released from special close the Fort Langley purchase and sale agreement related to the Centennial Museum. Other business, I'm going to move the motion. N1, Noel Booth Park upgrades, I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Martins. I'm going to speak to it here. I think the motion speaks for itself. It's a report to council, estimated costs for upgrades to Noel Booth Community Park in relation to fastball and Langley United Soccer Association. So the installation of lights at the North Center Diamond, Northwest Diamond, the other diamond, higher backstops is one item, potential consideration of replacement and significant upgrades to the current park buildings, and completion of an expanded paved additional parking area, and potential looking at some options for an additional soccer field. Plans to consult the public this year and refer this to the Recreation Parks and Advisory Committee for a commentary, and bring this forward as a fundable project within the 2024 capital budget process. Hopefully that timeline can be achieved to look at upgrading Noel Booth in a number of areas, prescriptive here, but not necessarily limited to this. So again, a capital project for Noel Booth Park. Councillor Ferguson.
Well, I think this is a great day for Brookswood Fernridge. Here we are, another contribution to the area, much needed. Even a couple of weeks ago, we talked about some individual went around, drove with a truck, and did some damage to the field. But now we're moving forward with other things. It's a really great day for Brookswood. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, call the question on P1. That carries unanimously. P2 is a motion requested by the Mayor's Council on Reasonable Transportation to confirm council's support for bus rapid transit. I'll move it. Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on this? I'm going to speak to it. I think, again, it speaks for itself. That council declares its support for bus rapid transit along 200 Street to connect SkyTrain in the city of Langley and Willowbrook, the Township of Langley's Carville Transit Exchange, and Maple Ridge. And that directs our staff to work with the Mayor's Council on Regional Transportation and TransLink to prioritize 200 Street bus rapid transit and achieving it on the 200 Street corridor as reasonably possible, as soon as reasonably possible, to potentially commence service before or simultaneously with the start of service of the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain. And this is in relation to getting ahead of it here with TransLink, giving them comfort that this council support it. The staff have direction that this is what the Township of Langley Council is looking for, and communicate this directly to the ED of the Mayor's Council on Regional Transportation and TransLink staff. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, I think this is why I love this job, because we could vociferously disagree on some things, but then wholeheartedly agree on others. And I'm happy to see this on the agenda, and I think it'll be fantastic for the township once this starts to move forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This one, I think, is an easy one. The challenge here with BRT is currently unfunded and timelines unknown. And it's also unknown that if there are 10 BRT corridors, rapid bus and BRT corridors throughout the region, it's not clear where this ranks. And so I think working with the Mayor of Maple Ridge, communicating very clearly that this is what the township supports, this is what it's looking for, and TransLink has a willing partner in the Township of Langley, and especially this council and mayor. So with that, I'll call the question on P2. That carries unanimously. Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'd like to move a motion regarding completion of the 216th Street road dieting in North Langley.
Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so public safety is my priority. This particular stretch of road, so we're looking at 216th from 88th Street to 96th, 88th Avenue to 96th Avenue in North Langley. It's a wide stretch of road. Vehicles travel quickly along it. ICBC were there not too long back during morning drop-off for school in front of Topham Elementary, and they were clocking vehicles going through there at 70 kilometers an hour. So what this notice of motion speaks to is twofold. The first part is to complete interim road dieting that includes, but not limited to, a 30-kilometer-an-hour zone in front of Topham Elementary on 216th Street. I have heard comments about it's not helpful to just put up a sign. It's not, I agree. But it is helpful to put up a sign if the RCMP are made aware of the high speeds going through this section and ask their assistance, their traffic unit, in enforcing that sign. The second part is this is interim, because the second part of this notice of motion is referring to permanent road dieting that will be far more robust, including street designs for active transportation for cyclists and pedestrians and public consultation for council to consider within the 2024 capital budget process. We've heard from residents and parents in that neighborhood today. Mayor and council on our distribution list received 12 letters in support of this notice of motion. These people care deeply. And for me, this notice of motion is an example of a promise made, a promise kept. Thank you.
Just really quick question. If who would, I don't know whether the councillor would or staff would, if I may, through the chair. If we're only allowing 50,000 to complete, how much has been spent to date, if I may?
So this is I think a carry forward from the previous budget, so there's just a top up to finish the project, is that correct?
I'm not sure, actually.
Mr. Zwag, do you remember?
That is correct. It was one of the projects that was previously suspended by council, so should have enough carry forward money remaining in it.
To finish it, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, through your worship to staff. So I know that we had the south side of 88th, south side of 88th, that piece, and then you had the intersection at 88th and 216th, and then we have the north side of 88th. And I understand, reading the report, that the interim is strictly for the north side. Can you clarify where the signalization of 88th and 216th, what part, was that part of the previous project on the south side of 88th? I'm seeing nods over there. Is there any, I don't know if I speak to this or if I bring it up under other business, I'm just looking into some signalization challenges at that intersection. I face it every single morning and it frustrates me.
Just which intersection we're talking about?
216th and 88th.
Okay. It's already signalized, no?
It's already signalized, but I'm
making some changes to it, yeah. So we could address that in other business.
Is that okay? I wasn't sure if it was a part of this interim. It's not, okay.
But there is potentially a corridor project which is separate from this. Which we can speak to after this. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks. So I'll call the question on P3. That carries unanimously. So go back to you. Councillor Van Popta, go ahead and clarify that 216th status. Go ahead.
Oh, do I do it just by asking for a memo
No,
or?
Just back in. There's a project that's pending, which there's been a few meetings with. Multiple members of council participated in regards to the status of that project. So I'm not quite sure how to address the councillor's question.
I guess my concern is just that as the signalization stands right now, it's a little bit, I think, robust for what's occurring at that intersection. If we can modify it, I don't know what the long-term plans are for that corridor, so it might be appropriate later on, but what's happening there right now seems a little bit out of place.
So if we drill down to, is the issue simply that the intervals are incorrect given the traffic flows?
Yeah, the advance left is only on a green light. You can only turn left on a green light, a signalized specific, but you can't advance if there's no traffic coming. And, as somebody who drives that corridor quite often, you know, to not be able to turn left on a green seems odd. I can do it in Richmond where it's 5 times busier.
So perhaps simply referral to staff to review the signalization timing and priorities. Then that way we can just come back. We can do that by way of a memo under advice, or you can make that into a resolution if you like.
Yeah, a memo is fine.
Can we add to that? Maybe Councillor Martins, you have something to add to this? Go ahead.
I do, thank you. I'm just wondering if it's possible, perhaps it's an amendment to this notice of motion. Part B is speaking to the entire stretch of 216th from 96 to 88, then you're referring to the intersection right at the south end of that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that can be considered in part of the updated designs that we're requesting. Because it doesn't say not including the intersections, so perhaps that could just be tied into this as it's written, or maybe we need an amendment.
No, I don't think we can, Mr. Bracken, I think we don't even have a motion on the floor. We can just take a direction to do a memo on one on the intersection and one on the status of the 216th project. Would that be?
That's part B of the notice of motion, as I read it, is the entire 216th stretch from 88 to 96th. So I feel this is part of part B of the notice of motion.
It is, yeah.
Maybe this is too limiting.
This is
and
to change it though,
we wanna
potentially though, right? This is to change it or evolve it from where it is today. B, updated, right? Complete an update, yeah. So are you, Mr. Councilor, are you looking for an update on where it stands today?
Well, I guess in the long term, but in the immediate term, there needs to be some changes to that intersection.
Yeah, there's I think confused Mr. Bracken going on between one intersection and a whole corridor update.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the motion stands for itself. I think this matter is really about the signalization and priorities. So we could look at that and do that more quickly because it doesn't affect the infrastructure, whereas it may still be necessary to replace the infrastructure depending on the traffic flows as the corridor develops out.
Yeah, and there are potential design options for the corridor, which you just email me or Mr. Bracken, we can get those over to you. So you can see there is a plan, but this motion is trying to evolve it and change it.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
We can get
Yeah,
that
and
to you.
even if it's just temporary changes until that plan is in place, is fine.
That makes sense. Mr. Bracken, so you can get a memo on that intersection and then anything else you wish to add to it. That sound good?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I have direct council's attention to a memo that was in the distribution from Community and Policy Planning. Purpose of this memorandum, I printed it separately, so I don't know which item it is. I believe it's in today's distribution. Maybe everybody can find that.
Yeah.
Just an assistance. It's
Yeah.
page 21, and it's item 6.
Item 6. Let everybody pull that up.
My laptop died. Pull over. Oh, I saw that one, yeah.
So this is in regards to a memo outlining for us that Community Policy and Planning Department has been tasked with a significant list here, and I'll read it out. 200 Street 24E, that review that's underway. Brookswood Fernridge Neighborhood Plans, Fort Langley Streetscape Plan, Fraser Highway Employment Lands Area Plan, Regional Context Statement Updates based on Metro 2050, and some other changes regarding industrial land. Smith Neighborhood Plan Update, Williams Neighborhood Plan Update, and Willowbrook Community Plan Update. And I've asked for all of those to be completed last week. So I think that our sense of urgency here is something that we impress upon, to at least get things done, right? And so staff are outlining that if that's council's direction, then some additional resources. So it says here it's anticipated that additional positions are required, 2 additional regular full-time planners to commence in July of 2023, requesting funding to do that. So I'm going to move. How did I word this here? Motion to approve 2 planners as outlined in the memo to council dated May 8th, 2023. I so move. Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Just as a learning tool for myself, is it typical that hiring requests come to council, or is that just not under the jurisdiction of Mr. Bracken?
Mr. Bracken, go ahead.
You know, if these are additional positions, that means they're not replacing existing positions or apportioning people. This is going to have implications on the budget because effectively it'll be raising the budget revenue needs by 2 positions that would come from council, or at least be part of what's called the supplementary as part of the budget process.
Okay, thank you.
So, seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on that. That carries unanimously. Is there any other business? Oh, Councillor Kuntz, go ahead.
Thank you. So glad we're talking about road safety. I had the unfortunate occasion to ride along in an ambulance a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed that 36th Avenue, that the driver was avoiding 36th Avenue, and I asked him, he's like, yeah, it's just way too bumpy. And then a couple weeks later, I was actually sitting in the neighborhood somewhere. Someone didn't accost me, basically berated me for the fact that 40th Avenue and 200th Street and 36th Avenue, those roads are just in terrible condition. And I know that they've just been ripped up and now they've been sort of paved again. But is there any way that we can actually do it? Just is it the developer that repaves those roads? Because they're in really sad shape. And I know that one of the people that was talking to me, he has mobility issues. He has a wheelchair. So, you know, and he lives in Brookswood. So I just wanted to bring that to council's attention.
We can look into that, both of those locations, and see if there's any patching or if we can get the developer to
Yeah, I mean,
cover
some
it.
40th has been pretty bad too. I
Yeah,
think.
so 40th and 200th, right in front of 7-Eleven there. And then 36th Avenue, just 200 or 208th, and just kind of along that park area there. From, I think it's 205, just where it kind of connects to 32nd Avenue.
Those
So,
are pretty bad. Maybe we could get a memo again, just with a timeline.
Right.
That they're going to be done.
Yeah.
And when they're going to be done.
yeah, just that way, if this person does want to, you know, find out if I've actually said what I said I was going to do, that we have some answers. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I want to just continue with what Councillor Kuntz has said. If I may, maybe if I through the chair, maybe to Mr. Richardson or something. When folks are developing a large scale, I'm talking about 10-story and multi-acreages, usually the surrounding roads take a bit of a beating. Is there a standard or a process or policy that we try to get our staff to watch and see what they're doing with the roads, if I may, through the chair?
Through your worship, Council Ferguson, yes. The items that are noted are part of the approvals under the 1987 Brookswood Plan and were stormwater management upgrades and the installation of those works. So as noted, staff will provide a memo with regards to those items specifically. In more general terms, yes, we have a servicing agreement approach that outlines those requirements based on the subdivision development servicing bylaw with a design, construction, inspection, and acceptance process. So yes, that's part of our standard operating procedure, Your Worship.
Okay, just a supplemental, if I may, through the chair. I mean, we have to move forward with development and growth. We understand that. What if you've got on one side of the street, you've got developer A, next across the street, developer B, down, 200 or 300 yards later or meters later, developer C, and the list goes on in an area of about 4 or 5 different roads. Is there a way that you or the TOL can work with those regarding their I guess wear and tear on the roads?
Through your worship to Council Ferguson, yes, correct. And we try to mitigate those items as you mentioned, especially in light of some of the items that Councilor Kuntz has raised in terms of those broader public interest items. So yes, we do on a day-to-day basis try to provide for that level of service, noting that as a growing community, there may be some component parts in between, and we don't want to necessarily redo work in a growing area, but we try to temper that and mitigate that, as I mentioned, especially when there's broader public interest items, as Councilor Kuntz mentioned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other items, any other business? No? Any other items for special closed?
Yes.
Okay, so you can just press your request to speak there.
Yeah, I'd just like to add an intergovernmental item.
Anyone else? So with that, I get a motion to resolve into special closed. Moved by
I'm
Councilor.
sorry, we need a mover and a seconder for that?
Oh, to add an item or to move?
No, for the actual motion to go to special.
Yeah, I was
close.
just about to do that.
Oh, thank you.
So Councillor Bailey, that's Councillor Rint, seconded by Councillor Rint. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Martins. All those in favor? Closed. I was doing it correctly, Ms. Bauer, I swear. Thank you.